Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
I can't believe that such a young person is really as highly qualified as the references and diploma say. I am confused about your age. The future boss repeated this phrase several times in the last hour. The dialogue could have been called an interview, but it was more like an interrogation. Sitting at the oak table, a man in his 40s had already asked about 1,000 questions. He was not interested in simple, unambiguous answers. Max was interested in details. It seemed that he knew more about the girl than she knew at the moment when she crossed the threshold of the office and timidly said hello. Employers cared about all, even the smallest details of her life. Where and at what faculty she studied full-time or part-time, what grades she got, and whether the teachers appreciated the girl. The man clarified and wrote down in the diary the names of all the relatives Christina could name. He found out where she already worked and for what reasons she was fired, and also her attitude to pets and vaccinations. The only thing the man really didn't care about: references from past jobs. He stated that the former employer could write anything he wanted on the paper and not even have to thank him for it. It was just a paper that would not determine whether Christina would get a position as a caregiver or be left with nothing again. However, the man scrutinized the documents and then put them in a folder, pushed them aside, and looked at her carefully in the eyes. "Better tell me, beautiful child, why were you fired from your last job?" His gaze expressed complete distrust towards the girl. With every word, he wanted to catch her in a lie or point out her disreputable behavior. Christina sat across from this gullible man on the leather couch and wondered if she should continue the interview at all. She felt as if she were not applying for a position as a nurse for a sick old lady, but as if she were about to become an ambassador who would have access to state secrets. In spite of everything, neither fatigue nor the desire to get home and take a hot bath, Christina held herself with dignity. She politely answered her future employer's numerous questions and showed him impeccable patience and restraint. As a rule, this is how they want to see a person who will have to care for an elderly woman with a strong character. It is possible to understand employers in such a case. It is nice to realize that the nurse at the moment when her ward will show caprices and refuse to eat, will not put a pot on the head of an insane babka and will not knock on it to the colonels, but will only smile and continue with entreaties and tales to feed her from a spoon. For Christina, this kind of activity was not new. She had previously had the honor of watching over the elderly parents of wealthy people. Despite the fact that each of her wards was with its own complex character and certain requirements, today's potential boss pissed the girl off. And this despite the fact that in the first minutes Christina even experienced a slight sympathy for him. Max was really handsome, muscular body, swarthy skin, rough masculine chin, and full lips. All of this couldn't help but attract the girl's attention. Looking into his eyes, she seemed to drown. They were blacker than night, and surely ruined a large number of representatives of the opposite sex. It was enough only once to look at him, and it became clear that the girl disappeared. Even under his jacket, his broad shoulders, powerful arms, and muscles were noticeable. "Really, you're right. Christina couldn't stand it. I'm really too young for such a high qualification." The girl began to rise slowly from the sofa. "I think we will come back to this conversation in 10 years. Then I will be old enough to meet your expectations." Christina in no way expected to hear his commanding tone. Max said loudly, "Sit down." Despite the fact that he was still not considered the girl's superior and had no right to raise his voice at her, she didn't dare disobey. There was something in his voice. What made Christina obey? She instantly sat back down on the couch and thought about the fact that with that kind of grip, he could command an army instead of casting sit-ins for his elderly mother. He looked the girl straight in the eye and said, "Do you really think I'm asking stupid questions?" Max swept the hall with his impossible eyes. It was quite difficult to bear their gaze. The girl did not want to lie. She wished to remain extremely honest with him, but she could not, and slowly said, "I suppose you have good reasons for that. I don't think it's out of idle curiosity. My mom's coming to stay with me for 3 months. She just got out of rehab, so she won't be able to stay home alone. She'll need a lot of attention and your patience. To be honest with you, she's not the best temperament." Max was silent for a few minutes. Then he turned to the window and thought hard. He continued as if he were talking to himself. "We haven't spent time together for a long time. My mother has been separated for over a year. Ever since her second husband died. I'd like to spend as much time with her as possible. But my profession requires full commitment. If I stop devoting time to work, I'll have to support my mother and fulfill her whims. I simply won't have the financial ability." His eyes were full of coldness. When Max took his gaze away from the window and looked at Christina again. "And believe me, if I have to ask stupid questions for hours just to find the right person, I will do it." At this point, the girl had the very plausible opinion that Max was used to torturing those willing to work for him. But he had found a nurse who was not timid. This girl would never let anyone treat her like this. She knew what humiliation and disrespect were, and so she had made a promise to herself that she would never let anyone feel that way about her. The girl grew up in an orphanage. She was an orphan and had no idea who her parents were. The educator told that mom and dad loved their daughter very much, but they had to fly far away to a star. It was from there that they watched Christina and were proud of her. Frankly speaking, there was nothing to be proud of especially. The girl from time to time attended classes at the university and changed one job for another. The only thing she was really good at was taking care of the elderly. They reached out to her and were ready to fulfill any requirements of doctors, but only under Christina's constant supervision. Several of her charges had already died. They were too old and learned. It fell to the girl to watch over them before they died. Christina was confident that she would easily find a common language with Max's mother. That is why, as soon as the information about the vacancy arrived, she, without hesitation, went to the interview. But now her patience was wearing thin. "Excuse me, Max," calmly said the girl, addressing the failed employer. "I'm sorry I'm not the right person for your mother's care. I can't waste any more time answering your many questions. I can't take another couple hours. It's not worth wasting your time. Not yours, not mine." With these words, the girl quickly got up from the couch. I can imagine what a beating she will get from the head of the agency, who gave excellent recommendations and sent her here. Lucy would have easily sent a more experienced and qualified girl to this position, but she gave her a chance. She repeatedly told Christina that she saw potential in her and wanted to help her realize it by all means. But Christina once again failed to live up to the expectations of her older comrade. It is very good to be beautiful, but only if you do not plan to get a servant in a rich house as a nanny, maid, nurse, or housekeeper. And for those who are going to get such a position, beauty becomes an incredible disadvantage. Potential employers are weeded out during the interview process. Rich men treat such girls with great enthusiasm. But the bigger it is, the higher the risk that their wives will definitely refuse to hire them. It is better to be a middle-aged gray mouse from an intelligent family. Young and not-so-gray girls are not in fashion today. And to this, Max Lucy directed Christina not only because she wanted to help, he is lonely. And therefore, when hired, no beautiful lady will not sit next to her and give valuable advice. The decision on whether the girl would follow his mother would be made only by Max. But there was no point in pondering about it anymore. The girl had missed another chance to get a job. The only consolation for Christina was that she understood why Max was lonely. Anyone would just run away from him to the ends of the earth. Because living with a bore is a difficult enough ordeal, and even good looks and a piercing gaze can't change that. Christina quickly left the territory of the mansion and sat down in a cab. Sadly, she thought about the fact that such luxury will have to forget about it if she can't find a job in the near future. She would even have to give up taking buses and walk. She was in no hurry to tell Lucy that she had failed. That news would have to wait until tomorrow. Besides, no one was kicking her out. Christina left the rich house on her own. The girl was already near her own house when a message came on her phone. Max wrote that she was hired and already tomorrow she could arrive by 9 o'clock. She had to go through the registration procedure and receive detailed instructions. The boss's mother should arrive the day after tomorrow. She entered the mansion at 8:55. An earlier arrival would mean that Christina had voluntarily condemned herself to languish in front of her employer's office, showing undue interest. Being late would be even worse. Max would hardly want to deal with an unpunctual person who does not know how to calculate her own time. These are not qualities that would be worth mentioning in a resume and showing the boss on the first day to come 5 minutes early. Ideal solution. This period of time is enough time to gather your thoughts and put yourself in order if the need arises. Christina's experience in attending job interviews was so rich that she could write a book on how to behave properly to get a job. But she didn't use her knowledge herself for some reason. The door to Max's office was open, for better or worse. Whenever Christina had to knock on a closed door, she felt inexplicably awkward and could not cope with the feeling. Asking the question would do the trick. She was always terrified to hear an angry voice from behind the door, informing her that it was busy or that she had to close the door immediately. This is exactly what the teachers in the orphanage where the girl grew up did. It affected her fragile psyche and took its toll. It was noticeable that Max did not like to waste time. Despite the early hour, work was in full swing. And if in large companies by 9 o'clock employees only come to work and spend another hour to drink coffee with colleagues and wake up. In Max's case, it was different. It seemed that the work in his office never stopped. Since yesterday, from behind the door could be heard thundering and rolling of his voice. He was giving orders, at the same time pointing out mistakes and explaining what they led to. Most likely it was a telephone conversation, because there was no one in the office except Max. Christina realized that it was 8:59 on the clock. She should show herself on the doorstep of the office and draw attention to herself. Let Max see that she was not late, but arrived exactly at the appointed time. However, as soon as the girl made a step towards the door, she heard a woman's voice, and it came from the office. "Max, Bunny, are you wrong now?" From what she heard, the girl froze in shock, least of all Max. A stone impenetrable wall. He looked like a bunny, unless he was hiding in his closet or under his desk. Another Max. On autopilot, Christina took another short step and glanced fleetingly through the open door. No, there were two of them. A supervisor sat behind a desk, opening and closing a ballpoint pen. And next to him stood a tall, beautiful girl in a strong business suit. "You know how long it took me to get this contract for us?" The pretty girl in the skirts seemed to be indignant. She waved a pile of some papers in front of Max's face. "Now what? Now you turn your nose up. I agree. These guys may not be perfect, but who can boast of that quality?" Christina's greatest wish at this moment was to turn invisible. The scene, which she witnessed quite by accident, was clearly not meant for unauthorized viewers. The intimate bunny alone was worth what? The girl had the feeling that she had stumbled into someone else's bedroom without knocking and caught the couple in the middle of a not-so-applicable activity. Actually, it was their own fault. You shouldn't leave the door open. Anyone passing by here could quite unwittingly become a spectator of what was going on. Christina backed away from the office door, farther away, turned the corner, and took a breath. This morning, going to a new job, she did not plan to become a witness to an incomprehensible scene. The girl still couldn't decide what she had just seen. Whether it was a conflict of interest at work, or a quarrel between two lovers, or all together. Christina felt sincere joy not only from the fact that she had remained unnoticed, but also for the reason that her ward would arrive at her son's house only tomorrow. Old people tend to appear unexpectedly and at the most inopportune moment. And then, as if nothing had happened, to interfere in what is happening and give out valuable advice. If Max's mother were here right now, she'd probably ask, "What are you doing here? Nice ladies hiding from your boss or eavesdropping on these?" Christina immediately imagined this picture and a couple of faces from the office that would immediately turn in her direction and make such an expression that Christina involuntarily wanted to fall onto the ground. Try to tell and prove to anyone that it wasn't espionage, but a simple coincidence. No, she'd rather let what she'd seen and heard be her own little secret. The couple in the study were talking so loudly that the voices carried even into the hallway. However, it was hard to understand what they were talking about. Only one thing was clear: Max spoke in a calm, cold voice, and his interlocutor was constantly snapping and could not control her own emotions. "You're acting like an idiot." "My bunny, only a fool can afford to refuse such a lucrative offer." There was a rustling of papers. It was clear that the businesswoman was again showing him the papers lying on the table, considering it a weighty proof of her own rightness. Time was passing, and the hand of the watch, which was worn on Christina's wrist, came to the very top. However, the unfamiliar girl from Max's office did not even think to end either her monologue or not the most successful dialogue in her life. Christina didn't really want to interfere in a conversation filled with bunnies and goofs, but she realized that Max might think that the girl was late today, and therefore would be late all the time. Today it was especially important for the new caregiver to make a good impression on her boss. What was that involved? The girl didn't know yet, but she didn't see it as a big deal. He was just an employer, on whose decision depended whether she would get the job and the salary or not. At exactly 9 o'clock, Christina heard the voice of her boss. He clearly said that the meeting was over and would continue next time. Max explained to his interlocutor that now he had an important meeting, and therefore the person in the strong suit would have to leave his office. Most likely, the man had already gone to the door. Christina could make out every word he said. She could not believe her happiness. The boss turned out to be punctual, so what if he was a bore? This too has its advantages. However, the girl continued to bend her line. "All you have to do is sign the papers. Come on, you fool, sign it. And we'll make the evening just for the two of us." It's like she's stretching her words on purpose. "I've already told you firmly no, this deal is off. And besides, I'm very busy tonight." The girl, resentfully muttering something under her nose, flew out of the office and ran past Christina. Despite her speed, she managed to run her gaze distractedly over her. Only when she had already flown across the hall did she stop and quickly turn around. From the outside, it seemed that the information the stylish lady had gotten while running had just reached her brain. The business lady gave Christina a hard stare. No one even tried to hide dislike and surprise. The new nurse did not pretend not to notice the interest in her, but even nodded to her boss's business partner as a sign of greeting. She was particularly interested in who could afford to call Max a bunny and a fool at the same time. Christina assumed that they would often have to run into each other within the walls of this house, and therefore it was better to prepare for these meetings. The boss's supposed girlfriend looked dignified. The first thought that crossed Christina's mind was the realization that this is a rather expensive person. It would hardly look luxurious now, shower her with gold and diamonds. A strict suit sat perfectly on her slender figure, and stiletto-heeled loafers emphasized the beauty and length of her legs. The small jewelry would have gone completely unnoticed, but it emitted such a bright glow that it seemed to outshine the light of the lamps. Looking at her sleek black hair, Christina suddenly remembered the warlike Indians. The girl was very pretty, but not very friendly. She did not think of answering Christina's greeting. The business lady's face remained impassive and fearless. Just as abruptly as she had just stopped, the girl turned around and slammed the door loudly. Despite the fact that the appearance of this one especially had perfect upbringing was absent there. Christina could tell that as a professional nanny or caregiver. Never. A man who solves business issues by acquiring bunnies shouldn't get his nose above his own head. Christina's musings were interrupted by the voice of her boss. "Come in, my dear young lady." It was a pity that he saw her. It would have been much easier if Max didn't know that someone had unwittingly witnessed his conversation with the business lady. One good thing. He now knows that the nurse came strictly at the appointed time, not late and disrespectful. On the sea to life, Max watched carefully as Christina entered the office and took a seat on the couch. Looking at his face, it was hard to imagine that just a minute ago passions were raging here. He seemed indifferent, unperturbed, cold, and powerful, trying not to give away the shyness that had appeared from some unknown source. Christina said hello. Max answered her and pointed to the table that stood near his desk. He waited patiently for the girl to get up from the couch and move closer. "Max spoke before you, and I signed the documents. I would like to make it clear, if you even once again allow yourself to get up and walk out without listening to me to the end, Like you did in the interview, we're gonna have to break up. I'm the only one making the decision here. When will this conversation be over? That's understandable. He looked her straight in the eye without hesitation. Christina realized she wasn't mistaken. Her boss was not only a terrible bore, but also a tyrant. She realized that no position, even the most prestigious one, was worth it if someone could afford to talk like that. Better to walk and starve. She was about to open her mouth to say all the thoughts that were whirling through her head. But when she looked into his eyes, she could only shyly apologize. Max nodded approvingly, signaling that the subject was closed, and just as coldly, offered again to discuss all the terms of cooperation. The man listed the responsibilities of the caregiver and named the amount of monthly payments he would receive. Christina takes care of his mother. The sum exceeded any expectations of the girl. She tried her best to hide her unexpected joy. It would look unseemly and certainly unprofessional. Max would hardly be pleased. Finding out that his mother's new caregiver had once slaved for pennies, Christina quickly put a neat little signature on the proposed documents. An attentive person could recognize a lot from the handwriting for what it was. She was completely at ease. Smooth, neat lines could only give away the girl's poise, collectedness, and integrity. Well, now it was time to familiarize himself with Helen's schedule. For the first time ever, a note of uncertainty and doubt slipped into his intonation. Why it happened became clear in a few seconds. A heavy folder appeared on the table in front of Christina. Max offered to familiarize himself with the papers and allowed to ask questions, if necessary. Frankly speaking, the girl was afraid to seem overly curious. After she had received the first beating from her boss, she decided that she would just read everything she was given and do without another dialogue. But she couldn't fulfill the promise she'd made to herself. When she opened the first sheet, she immediately raised her head and looked at her boss with surprised eyes. "Your mother speaks Chinese. Do not be surprised, Christina. It was promising in the years of her youth and the profession obliged. But today it's hard enough for her to give up her old habits. Now more than half the world speaks the language, and she doesn't want to be left behind. Don't worry, you can talk to her in English. All you have to do is take her to a tutor." Christina went back to reading, and as she turned the pages, she felt more and more pity for her ward. Her day was scheduled almost minute by minute. The girl's introduction. Old age is when you sit in a rocking chair by the plate, watch TV, and occasionally solve crossword puzzles, and not spend the only free minutes to say goodbye to one teacher and get to the next. The girl's imagination had already painted the face of a sad old woman who was being forced to attend classes to keep her sanity. However, she had no idea what an active woman she was to meet. Helen was burning with the desire to live and could not imagine that she would sit at home and watch Malakov's show on TV. While Christina was carefully reading all the documents that were in the folder, Max was silently watching her. It seemed that he was trying to read the girl's thoughts and look into her soul. The man nodded impatiently with his pencil and the desk top of his desk. Once the girl had read everything that was presented to her, she decided that she could make her own point. "Do you really think all this is necessary for a woman of her age who has undergone a major operation?" The pencil with which he was beating out the rhythm flew sharply to the other side of the table. He looked at Christina with an annihilating look and said, "Her daughter needs this." Christina and her new boss went to meet Helen at the airport. The car was driven, of course, not by Max, but by his driver, a mature, respectable man who seemed to be fused to the steering wheel and paid no attention to anything but what was happening on the road. Max's mother was returning today from a clinic in Germany. There she had undergone heart surgery and spent several weeks in rehab. As soon as Max got in the car and buckled up, he was instantly engrossed in his laptop and completely immersed in his work. He wasn't interested in how long their drive was or if they would make it in time for the plane to arrive. All the most important things were happening on his computer right now. Looking at the expression on his face, Christina decided that her boss was checking the morning mail or solving a problem of incredible proportions. However, she did not rule out the possibility that he might be corresponding with the person who had loudly called him a fool and an idiot yesterday morning. Max was so fascinated by what was happening on the other side of the screen that he never once took his eyes off it. He continued to work while they sat in the waiting room at the airport. The computer was turned off only when the arrival of the flight on which his mother was arriving was announced, and the hall began to fill up, with people waiting and meeting. Then the man finally turned off his laptop and put it in his bag. His cold face trembled and moved as the doors began to open and the passengers of the arriving flight appeared in the hall. Christina could not believe her eyes. Could this unapproachable man of stone really smile? She carefully followed his gaze and saw that a rather busy couple appeared on the horizon. A pumped-up man in dorm mooring jeans, which seemed to tear from the slightest movement, and a girl in a t-shirt with a smiling kitten drawn on it. Following them came a wheelchair. There was no doubt who sat in it. Black eyes shone half a face the same as Max's. Christina correctly assumed it was her boss's mother. And in front of her walked her daughter and her boyfriend. "Son," the woman shouted loudly, finding Max with her eyes. She even seemed to be bouncing in her chair with impatience. It must be said that she loved her son very much, and he reciprocated. There was an invisible bond between them, which is rarely preserved between children and parents. "Who is that with her?" Christina asked. She wanted to see if her hunch was correct or if she was wrong. "That's my little sister Maria." Cervantes is always looking for adventure, not only for herself, but also for others. That's why Mom has such a busy schedule. Maria is sure that if you just let her relax, Mom will go crazy and will bore everyone with her moralizing and simple boring. Max answered the new caregiver's question exhaustively. Christina noted that the phrase about boring was just right. By the way, if this quality was possessed by Helen's son, I see from whom it was passed on. Meanwhile, Helen said something angrily to her son-in-law. The expression on her face accurately conveyed any emotion. Therefore, it was easy to guess that the woman was angry. However, the man didn't even turn a deaf ear. He continued to walk confidently toward his lover's brother. Angry at the lack of attention, Helen pulled something from her pocket that looked distantly like a remote control. She easily pressed the button and smiled. It didn't take long for the people around her to react. The suitcase that Alex, Max's sister's boyfriend, was carrying started to move. It vibrated and shook, bouncing, snapping. It was as if inside it had just come to life. Something big and strong. Or something. From surprise, people scrambled from the side, looking around in confusion and just in case, trying to get away from the suspicious suitcase, and at the same time from the man who was carrying it. The strong, muscular man frowned and looked at his mother-in-law with a slight reproach. There's a reason they say old people are like children. Alex and Max looked at each other quickly and nodded satisfactorily. It seemed that only Christina did not understand what was happening and where she had gotten to. Someone from among the passengers and greeters loudly shouted terrorists, and panic left the whole hall. Some called the police. Others grabbed the children in their arms and rushed to the exit. 2 policemen on duty were rushing towards Alex. On the way, they even forgot their breakfast and grabbed the holster quite in the side of the neck. Calmly, in a loud voice, said Alex. To be honest, his voice, thick bass, which would be envied by the most famous opera singer, was clearly not intended to inspire calmness and confidence in the surrounding. As expected, the panic only grew larger around the man with the suitcase. Abruptly, an empty space was formed. In the hall where the people from the airplane had just entered. It was hard to imagine such a thing. People were trying to run as far away as possible, and those who had not yet had time to leave the plane crowded at the doors and caused the formation of a real jam. Those who had already entered the hall, expectations with horror rolled backwards, and the rear ones, not understanding what was happening and why they were not allowed into the hall, on the contrary, strived forward. It seemed that only a second had passed, but Helen was not next to Alex. She could be in danger because the woman was in a wheelchair and could not stand up for herself. However, Max was surprisingly calm. Everything seemed to be going according to his plan, and he was even enjoying himself. The man did his best to keep an indifferent expression on his face, but the corners of his lips treacherously turned upward. It was enough to realize that what was happening in the hall gave him incredible pleasure. His eyes were filled with pride. Yes, it was pride. Christina shook her head fearfully, trying to push away the thought that her new boss was not only a bore and a tyrant, but also a madman. "Where is your mother, Max?" Christina tried her best to shout out the crowd in the waiting room and draw attention to herself. But her boss didn't even turn a deaf ear. Of course, a stone wall would not pay attention to a mere nurse. Meanwhile, the situation with the suitcase, inside of which seemed to live something big, stronger, and more frequent, developed quite rapidly. Realizing that in order to calm the crowd, the only thing left to do was to open the suitcase and show the contents to those around him. Alex did exactly that, and it didn't bother him at all that his mother-in-law's power of attorney had disappeared somewhere. He lowered the bag on the floor and only touched the lock, as everyone heard a hysterical scream. The man didn't pay any attention to those around him. He just pulled the zipper. And that's when the suitcase on the floor really exploded. Multicolored things flew out of it: dresses and sweaters, handkerchiefs and plates. Expensive clothes bought by Helen during the whole time of her stay in Germany. It should be noted that before the scheduled surgery, she had the opportunity not only to visit expensive brand stores, but also to buy things from the latest collections of famous designers. Her son never spared money for his mother and always fulfilled any of her whims. A turquoise Panama, bought in one of the boutiques, landed neatly on Alex's head. It was neatly laid on the square bald head, which made Alex immediately seem to be a short-sighted and slightly ill man. The man stared at the arriving policeman. One was trying to pull a lacy blouse off his shoulder. The second one helped, and both law enforcement officials strained to see who was the culprit behind their ridiculous appearance. At the bottom of the suitcase on the floor was a toy excavator. The device not only imitated the sounds of real construction equipment, but also rhythmically lowered and raised the bucket. It seemed that such a joke was worthy of a 5-year-old child. But no, it was organized by a grown woman who only a few weeks ago managed to avoid a heart attack. At that moment, an unfamiliar voice sounded very close. But Christina immediately realized who it belonged to. Helen drove up in her chair quite briskly. "Well, hello, son." Max bent down to give his mother a hug, a kiss. She guided his neck with beautiful manicured hands. If Christina hadn't seen the woman's face, she would have easily declared that the hands belonged to a well-groomed young girl. On the ring finger of her right hand was a thin gold ring, most likely a wedding band. On her left hand, the woman had a neat white gold bracelet. And on her finger, Christina noticed a diamond ring. The man was so happy to see his mother that he was ready to pick her up in his arms and hold her close to him. But the wheelchair prevented him from doing so. Helen snuggled into the neck of her own son and pronounced, "I missed you very much. I really missed you." Looking at this touching scene, Christina deep down envied both Max and his mother a lot. She had never received any affection or love. She didn't remember her mother. And the teachers of the orphanage did not have enough time or mental resources. Max muttered quietly that he missed his mother too. And his new employee stood next to him and could not believe that her boss was capable of affection and tenderness. It turns out that it's not always a stone wall. That's how Christina began to call her new boss. Can only speak with a cold voice full of ice and gnashing metal. It was amazing to hear the softness and warmth coming from Max's lips. He was completely different from the man who yesterday morning had spoken haughtily to Christina in his office and reprimanded her for allowing herself to stop the interview without his approval. The mask of arrogance quickly fell away with the appearance of the mother. It took its toll on the nurse. Like a blow under the breath, Max smiled genuinely at Helen, and therefore looked several years younger. Christina figured he must be even less than 30. Earlier, when his expression remained cold and haughty, and when his eyes shone with incredible self-confidence, Max looked much older. It gave him a great deal of importance. Now that there was no one else to demonstrate it, it turned out that this man was not just attractive, but damn handsome. The nurse couldn't literally take her eyes off him. She liked literally everything about his swarthy cheekbones, his dimpled chin, his powerful neck, which seemed to be tight in the collar of his shirt. The girl had the urge to undo a few buttons and stroke the mark left on his skin by the stiff fabric. And then she would rise up on her toes and gently touch his lips with hers. So full and firm, she timidly raised her eyes and met his eyes. Big, moist, black ones that inspired fear in them. Christina felt as if she had been hit with ice water. She couldn't believe that all those thoughts that rushed through her head in a hurricane were her own. The remnants of sanity. It was the suitcase situation that decided her. She imagined what she would have to endure while working with Helen. And if she had the nerve to make a childish spectacle of herself in the waiting room of an international airport, just to make her own son smile. Christina turned away abruptly, in the back of her mind berating herself for letting her own brain shut down. She's a mere nanny to his elderly mother, just a caregiver. He's a Stonewall, a rich man willing to pay for her labor just for that. He'll have a whole bunch of them, and each one will be ready to look into the mouth of her handsome boss. And for love and everything else, he has a business lady in a strict suit. Her condition. The girl wrote it off as mild stress and a momentary freak out. "How are you feeling, my sweet mom?" In a gentle voice, Max asked, "I think your prank is a direct confirmation of your full recovery. Or didn't you know how to show off the outfits you bought?" The man laughed loudly and his mother laughed back. For a moment, while they were busy with each other, Christina allowed herself to calm down and cool down. And only then did she allow herself to turn around. Mother and son kept their identical black eyes on each other. The whole world seemed to cease to exist for the two of them. And only the new nurse had the opportunity to watch this touching scene as long as she wanted. They were alike, and it wasn't just the eyes. Max had a high forehead and a flat nose and a stubborn chin, all of which he had inherited from his own mother. Even someone who was not distinguished by special knowledge, the gnomish physicist would easily determine that no one in the sight of this couple should hope for pardon. It was then that Christina realized that the fabulous salary that Max had been assigned was not all that great. While Max and his mother were enjoying each other's company, Maria and Alex were busy packing, scattered all over the room. As soon as the suitcase was closed, Alex led away for questioning the people, who until a few minutes ago were thrashing around the hall in search of shelter, again began to walk measuredly and leisurely from corner to corner. Some were waiting for the arrival of the next flight, others, on the contrary, a short time before the departure of their own airplane. The only reminder that recently there was panic and chaos in the hall was Panama, which Alex did not put away in his suitcase, but put on Maria's head. Finally, Max took his eyes off his own mother and turned his attention to Christina. He pointed his finger at her and said, "Meet Christina. This is Christina, your nurse. As long as you live in my house, this girl will accompany you everywhere and help you with anything you need." Helen took her time, turned her neatly tucked head toward Christina, smiled sweetly, and slowly reached out. "But hello, Christina." The tone, the way he spoke. The voice was eerily familiar to the girl, and the look in those big black eyes. Now there would be two of them, young and old. And somehow it seemed that the old woman would be much more trouble than her son. If Christina had not seen with her own eyes the picture of which Helen had become the artist, the girl would have been sure that she was incredibly lucky to have a job. From the outside, her mentee appeared to be the embodiment of charm, elegance, and grace. But beneath the appearance of an elderly angel lurked the nature of a real devil. It should not be forgotten that her son, under every whim and every prank of his mother, did not react in any way except his own smile and loud laughter. One could conclude that the antics that had paralyzed the airport today were in the order of the day with this pair of accomplices. Not even a second passed while these thoughts flashed through Christina's mind. She had time to think about everything in the world, while Helen turned her face from the nurse to her son. "My sweetheart, you said I look healthy, didn't you?" In response to his mother's questions, Max nodded affirmatively. "So explain it to me. A healthy woman is full of vigor. What did you hire this beautiful girl for?" She was the one he didn't tolerate any objections. She seemed to demand an exhaustive answer to her question immediately. "Do you really have a nurse? You strong, healthy man has a nurse who follows you around and gives you a spoon or a piece of toilet paper." At this point, Max artistically coughed, trying to suppress another fit of laughter. I'll be honest with you, sweet mom, that I don't have a caregiver. It was hard to say that the son was being honest with his own mother. Surely she knew nothing about the business lady who was still loudly deciding business matters in Max's office yesterday morning. Then I'll ask you another question that is especially important to me. Why do I need to be strong, strong, strong? And most importantly, healthy. I need a nurse. The phrase sounded triumphant, and Helen gave Christina a glare. This woman had an ironclad logic. At times, she reminded Christina of a 5-year-old child. The prospect of working in this family seemed less and less bright by the minute. Aren't we having breakfast together today? My darling. Helen sat in the chair and tugged her son's pant leg, trying to get his attention. Yes, Mommy, of course. We will definitely spend time together, but only after I get home from work. I'm sorry, I have a lot of errands, meetings, negotiations scheduled for today. So you'll have breakfast with Maria and Christina, and maybe Alex, if his domestic orderlies will let you go after your prank. Max laughed again, but quickly pulled himself together. Work. Helen stretched out in a disappointed voice and sighed heavily. Her eyes childishly filled with tears, and her lower lip moved forward involuntarily. For a moment, Christina felt funny, but she held back, and Helen did too. She just shook her head angrily. Mom, you realize I can't give up my business and stay home with you. Then we'd have nothing to eat, and we'd have to sell that adorable hat. He smiled slightly and pointed to the Panama, in which Maria was still standing. The girl was at a loss. She was anxious to meet her mother's new nurse. But she was more worried about the young man who had promised to marry her yesterday. And today he'd been taken away by the police to testify. Give me your word of honor that you'll spend dinner with your family, the woman said flatly. I promise I'll be home, and I won't say a word about work tonight or tomorrow morning. And I'm at your disposal. Sweet Maman, Max theatrically bowed to his mother. Well, that means we'll have to entertain Christina without you. She gave the nurse a thoughtful look. That didn't sound good. Something told Christina that only one of their small group would be having fun. Nevertheless, the girl leaned over her ward and, trying to seem attractive and friendly, said, Hello, Helen. I am very glad to meet you. I don't think we'll be bored. I wasn't going to be bored. The nice woman replied and smiled that strange smile that inspired the people around her. A quiet horror. Christina felt a chill run down her spine. If earlier she had thought that adult and elderly women spent their leisure time in cultural institutions or at home, then today, after the joke of her ward, realized that she was deeply mistaken. It was possible that she would come up with something new, equally fun. And most likely, that activity would not be on the list Max had provided her. As Christina, Helen, and Max approached the car, everyone suddenly remembered Maria and her lovers. The boss's mother was already sitting in the car, and the driver was stowing the chair in the trunk, when the woman asked in a completely innocent voice what had happened to Alex and if he would go with them. Quietly enough so his sister wouldn't hear. But clearly Max said that he was a grown man and would solve his problems on his own. He, meaning Max, would not be involved in any way. Men always disliked each other and treated each other with a kind of jealousy. Max was not happy about the fact that his sister favored this not-soon-jumpin' tight jeans. Besides, Alex was constantly on the lookout for himself, and his sister regularly borrowed money from him. Alex did not like Maria's mother very much either. She preferred to see next to her daughter someone like her own son, as masculine and handsome, with business acumen and flair. They are circus performers who were kicked out of the arena. That's why the object of Helen's jokes and mockery was regularly Alex and not anyone else. Why are you doing this, Max? Christina was somewhat indignant. She did not know all the subtleties of relations within the family, and therefore felt indignation. The boss only looked at Christina with cold eyes, and the girl realized that she was facing a stone wall again. The effect of Mom's joke was over. Unbelievable. His mother is putting on a circus on the grounds of the international airport. But he only laughs and not a word of reproach in her direction. Alex, the injured party, will have to deal with what happened. He was just unlucky to carry that damn suitcase. Christina realized that she would not stay in this place for long. As soon as Max thought that she was not a professional, and he had his own scale of criteria for evaluation, the boss would put her out on the street with no severance pay. The three of them drove home Helen, Max, and Christina. Maria stayed at the airport to rescue Alex, who seemed to be tortured at the police station. Max drove the car by himself. Where had the driver gone? No one but the chief knew, and Christina didn't bother to ask. She realized that asking unnecessary questions while staying in this family was strictly forbidden. Helen seemed to have turned into a child again. She suddenly laughed and began to talk about how the suitcase in Alex's hands had burst. No, you heard it all at once. And oh, where to run, what to do. I'll tell Lisa today. She'll laugh. And Lisa, the maid at Max's house who'd been working for him for over 10 years. She was a grown woman who had become a member of the family. Her boss liked her a lot, executive, responsible, never asks too many questions and gets things done quickly, and had become friends with his mother. Helen seemed particularly pleased with herself right now, and Christina's boss liked that. He was one of those kids who did everything possible and impossible to please their elderly parents. They usually feel that every second of life can be the last. Therefore, let it be filled with joy and fun. Phew, but I did it for something. It turned out that Max is not as hopeless as it seems at first glance. He asked questions without taking his eyes off the road. Max, what did I do? I mean, the backhoe turned on. I'm sure it was Maria who put the toy in my suitcase by accident. I found the remote control in my jacket pocket. To be honest, I mistook it for the one that came with my chair. You know, the doctor said that if I get tired, I can change the position under my elbow or pillows near my neck. Helen quickly turned the conversation to another topic, hoping that her son would be quickly distracted, concerned about his own mother's comfort and convenience. Max, however, was relentless. He continued to ask his mother leading questions and enjoyed watching her try to extricate herself from the situation. Helen, anxious, thrashed in her chair. Once again, she reminded Christina of a child who had given birth and was now trying to get away with it. Okay, son, I'm sorry. I just really missed you. All right. I'll apologize too. The mother realized that there was no point in trying to get away with it anymore, so she admitted her own guilt. But it didn't upset her in the slightest. Tell me, please, were you fed on the plane? The doctor told me that you need to eat by the hour and be sure to take the prescribed medication. Max realized that it was time to end the conversation with the circus performance, so he turned to the questions that really bothered him. Yes, son, they served fish, which, as you know, I can't stand. The obliging stewardess tried her best to feed me, but when she realized it was useless, she put my portion in a box and made sure I picked it up on the way off the plane. Helen's story was fascinating. She seemed to like the attention of others and was making a maximal effort to keep it as long as possible. It's okay, we'll get there. And I'll be sure to feed Zeus. Finished the monologue with the boss's mom. Christina had yet to meet Zeus. The big Caucasian sheepdog lived in the backyard in an aviary, and at night it was kept on the whole territory of the mansion, warning the owner in case of danger. The dog had lived with the owner since the house was built and had become a member of the family. If something had happened to Zeus, Max wouldn't have survived it. The company, consisting of the mother's son and her newfound nurse, reached home quickly enough and without any adventures. This especially pleased Christina, who had not yet had time to come to her senses after what she had seen at the airport. Helen, tired from the long flight and emotions, dozed off in the car. "We are home, Mom," solemnly declared Max, stopping the car at the gate. "Really?" Helen said, waking up. It hadn't even been 6 months. She demanded to be taken out of the car immediately and said that she would walk home. She's full of energy and completely healthy. And this chair was invented by the doctors to make her, and Helen believed that age is a judgment, and that the surgery she has undergone prohibits her from enjoying life and doing what she wants to do. On the way home, the mother walked leaning on her son. Helen looked like the ultimate conspirator and said she was going to show him her greatest treasure. "Mom, let's have your finds. Will you share with Christina?" I have no doubt that another diamond necklace with emeralds will be a splurge. Look with the dress that you showed in the morning to a good half of the waiting room. Now I'm really in a terrible hurry." Max tried with all his might to turn his mother's attention to Christina. Helen did not even turn her head in the direction of the nurse. It was a secret that concerned only her and her son. "I will appreciate your fine tonight. I swear to you," Max promised. Helen nodded contentedly and entered the house on her own, letting go of her son's hand. She held the lady's purse tightly in her hands. It was there that something of particular value to the woman was kept. Christina was visited by a feeling of slight envy. She always wanted a beautiful life, but the luxury for the girl was traveling by cab instead of streetcar or bus. One thing she did have, however. This piece of jewelry had no price. Her mother's earring, which was found near the crash site. The other one was never found, most likely burned with the body. Christina received the treasure on the day of her majority. The earrings were kept in the safe of the director of the orphanage, and the girl did not even suspect what gift the educators had prepared for her. The girl has always been on a good account. She did not enter into conflicts and always went towards helping everyone who needed it. "I hope you two will find common ground," grinned Max and returned to the car. Christina tried to assure him that she would find a common language with her mother, but she realized that it would be difficult and would take a long time. If someone asked the girl to make a rating of the most dangerous professions, the first on the list would be the position of a caregiver. Before meeting Helen, Christina was convinced that the ideal nanny for an elderly woman. However, Lady Perfection has failed. To please the new ward turned out to be quite difficult. If at the airport and in the car the woman was cheerful and actively participated in conversations, then it was worth it to cross the threshold of the house, as she became an exact copy of her son in the image of a stone wall. The woman silently drank a glass of water, drinking the prescribed medicine, demanded help to disassemble the suitcases, and stated that she wanted to stay alone. But no sooner had Christina left her ward's room than the door opened and Lisa, Max's housekeeper, appeared on the threshold. She seemed to Christina rather stern and not talkative, but not in Helen's company. The women, like two good old friends, hugged for a long time and even cried. After hugs, Lisa said that she was preparing a festive dinner and would be happy to see Lenotchka in her place of honor. Christina suggested to her ward to go downstairs and have something to eat. She remembered the morning conversation and realized that the woman still hadn't eaten. Helen, however, waved her head negatively and settled down on the bed. She defiantly turned away from Christina, and the girl, who had experience with such individuals, took a seat in the corner on a chair and opened a book lying on the table. The first thing that caught my eye, not the title written in Chinese, but the bookmark. An old photograph served for that purpose. On it, as Christina guessed, was Helen, and standing next to it were Max and Maria. So there had to be another child in this family. Strange, why hadn't he or she come to the airport to meet their mom? Christina would have given everything she owned in this world just to see her parents. She was so engrossed in the photo shoot that she started to look at the smallest details. Even then, Helen dressed beautifully and made sure that the children were neat and back. But the young and attractive woman had a light dress and a buildable fabric. It pulled her belly in nicely, drawing attention to it. Maria was dressed in a sundress and two long braids with white bows tied at the sides. Max, dressed in shorts and a shirt, even then looked like a real man who could be trusted with the whole world. The girl did not notice how the time flew by. She was immersed in her own memories and tears came to her eyes. Christina did not notice how loud the sobs knew and woke Helen. She was looking at the girl curiously and didn't understand why the new nurse seemed so familiar. Christina, on the other hand, looking at the details, recognized the earrings, a similar piece. She kept it carefully in the pocket of her purse, and on her birthday, she made sure to wear it when she was alone. Christina did not like noisy companies, and therefore, every year she bought a bottle of champagne and a cake, and celebrated the holiday alone. She took out the most elegant dress, did her hair, and put on her mother's earring, despite the fact that she never managed to get acquainted with her own parents. The girl never tired of thanking them for the gift of life and sharing news and achievements. The The girl understood that in those days it was very difficult to get beautiful jewelry, but she could not call this situation other than a coincidence. She wanted to ask Helen where the earrings had come from and whether she still had them, but she remembered that no one in this family liked unnecessary questions. Christina shuddered at the touch that brought the girl back to reality. Helen woke up. She slowly got out of bed and approached Christina. The woman didn't understand why the girl was so interested in the old photo. Yes, there were times when they were happy as a family. Back then, Helen, a young and beautiful mother of two, was waiting for the arrival of her youngest daughter. She and Greg, Father Max, were happy. Doctors said that after the birth of Maria, Helen was unlikely to be able to carry a baby again. But they were wrong. Returning from vacation, Helen complained more and more often of feeling unwell, nausea, and dizziness. But after a visit to the gynecologist, everything fell into place. She was given one of the most satisfying diagnoses ever. She will soon be a mom again. In gratitude for this joyful news, Greg presented his wife with a pair of exclusive earrings. There were simply no analogs of such a product. He personally drew a sketch and gave it to an acquaintance of the jeweler. Not everyone could afford such luxury. That evening, the couple left the children with a nanny. They sometimes invited a neighbor to look after Max and the little one, and went to the movies themselves. Helen and Greg were happy to know that they would soon be young parents again. Their financial situation and social status allowed them to raise another baby. 9 months flew by like a blink of an eye. Helen gave birth to a healthy, strong baby girl who looked like her father. It was decided not to take the older children to the discharge from the maternity hospital. Greg personally drove the car, and Helen held the baby girl in her arms. She didn't bother to buckle up. It was uncomfortable and hot. And her husband always drove the vehicle carefully. But not that day. The car skidded on a bend. It turned over several times and caught fire. Emergency personnel arrived on the scene and found the little girl requiring long-term treatment, while EMTs tried to get her parents out of the burning car. Helen and Greg spent a long time in intensive care, and there was practically no chance to save them. The doctors made a disappointing diagnosis, and therefore it was decided to transfer the girl, who miraculously managed to survive, to a baby home. The older children spent all this time with relatives. And when Helen and Greg came to their senses, they were informed that the little girl had died. The hospital staff decided that the young couple would have too much money to spend on their own recovery, and they had 2 more children on their necks. One of the nurses who was on call that day found an earring near the burned-out car, a rare piece of white gold jewelry. The honest girl handed the treasure to the workers of the baby home, where the girl was given, and asked it to be sure to pass the jewelry to her owner. After the child grows up, for the luck of the pupil in that orphanage worked teachers from God. When the girl reached adulthood, she was presented with an amazing gift, greetings from Mom and Dad from the other side of the world. Helen and Greg long experienced the bitterness of loss. Not only did they spend more than a year in hospitals and clinics, it took them even more time with psychologists. Helen's husband blamed himself for the accident that killed their newborn daughter. Helen tried with all her might to convince her husband that he was wrong. After 5 years of agony, Greg died. His heart could not withstand the constant pricking of his conscience. Dying, the father, who had lost his daughter, said that he was going to her, and the older children were left in the care of their mother. Despite the fact that more than 20 years had passed since that terrible accident, Helen remembered everything that had happened to them. She regularly went to the cemetery where her daughter and husband were buried, bringing flowers and toys. When her son announced that Helen was going to Germany for surgery, the woman was outraged and she couldn't leave just yet. Her dead daughter's birthday was coming up and Helen was bound to visit her grave and talk to the little girl. Max assured his mother that he would drive himself to the cemetery and take whatever his mother said. Frankly, he thought it was time to stop taking what had happened 20 years ago so seriously. Helen arrived in Germany a few days early. She had expressed a desire to go shopping in malls and furniture stores. Her son's financial situation allowed her to buy anything she liked. During one of the shopping trips, Helen stumbled upon an antique shop quite by accident. Her son loved antiques, and the woman knew how to make him feel good. She was perusing the display cases and racks when she saw earrings on one of the shelves. The woman immediately forgot about gifts for her son and began to think about what kind of dress she could wear with this or that set. Her attention was attracted by a single piece of jewelry. When Helen took a closer look, her whole life seemed to flash before her eyes. She immediately remembered the day when Greg, her late husband, had given her earrings based on a unique design. She remembered the accident and her husband's agony. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Please tell me, where is the second earring? I would like to buy this set." She turned to the seller of the antique shop. "This earring is sold alone for more than 10 years, lying on the counter, and does not cause anyone's interest. Can you imagine? Everyone wants a set. It is understandable." The seller was genuinely surprised that someone was interested in this product. The earring was brought to the store many years ago by a woman. She did not know the history of this product. She only said that she had found it on the street and wanted to get some money. Since then, the white gold earring with a small scattering of diamonds lay on the counter and did not arouse interest among customers until Helen stepped over the threshold. At that moment, she was ready to give any money just to buy what was once rightfully hers. It seemed that this purchase would give her back a piece of the past, bring back memories of those days when they were all happy, when she had her little girl in her arms and knew that Papa, her older brother, and sister were waiting for them eagerly at home. It was about this discovery Helen had been so eager to tell her own son, the businessman, and that man. And now when she woke up to find her new caregiver, Christina, scrutinizing photos of the family and crying bitterly. "What's the matter? Baby, did a picture of my whole family happy upset you so much?" Helen asked politely. "Hugging a girl?" Christina not only didn't expect her ward to wake up so unexpectedly, but also didn't think that the woman would take part and ask what was the reason for her sudden tears. No one had ever been so polite to the girl. She could no longer hold back her emotions. The girl cried and told everything that had happened to her in her short but so bitter life. The girl knew that, most likely, after such an act, the owner would ask her to leave her post as a caregiver. But she could not help herself. Tears rolled from her eyes without stopping. She told Helen that she had grown up in an orphanage and had not known parental love and affection, that she had had to work from an early age to make ends meet, and now she had to look after other people's parents to earn her bread. She regretted very much that she had never seen her own father and mother. Helen clasped the girl tightly to her breast and whispered, "Well, will you be good to cry? We all have a hard life." And then Helen began to tell her story. When she reached that period of her life, when she experienced the joy of motherhood for the third time, the woman could not resist and cried too. She decided that she could open up to this bright, defenseless girl. Helen opened her handbag and took out an earring. "Look, it's from my past. My late husband gave me the earrings for giving him a daughter. She died in a terrible accident, and her husband died a few years later, couldn't bear the loss a few weeks ago. I saw this earring by chance in a store overseas. I know I can't be wrong. This set was one of a kind and unmatched. My husband made them especially for me." Christina listened to the story of this amazing woman and could not believe her own ears. Was it really true? The girl slowly stood up and walked to her bag. Helen looked questioningly at her nurse and did not understand what was going on. Didn't understand exactly until the girl pulled out the exact same earring. The set was connected. Both of them stood in the middle of the room and looked at each other, not understanding what was going on. No, both Christina and Helen made a logical connection in their heads, but couldn't believe that this was really happening to them. And it's not a dream. "My daughter, my sweet girl. All these years I've mourned you and carried toys and presents to the cemetery. And you're here, alive and well," cried Helen, hugging and kissing the one she wanted to send away 2 hours ago, just to convince her son that she didn't need a nurse. They spent the entire afternoon like that. When Max got home, he was concerned as to why his mother still hadn't gone downstairs, and handed out directions to anyone who would come across her path. The man went up to the second floor and froze in front of the bedroom door that was meant for Helen. He heard someone crying in the room, and without even waiting for someone to answer his knock, he entered abruptly. The man was genuinely surprised to see his mother. The strong and unapproachable woman was sitting on the bed next to Christina, a simple nurse who had been hired for the job only yesterday. It was hard to imagine that someone could melt her heart in such a short period of time. "Mom, what's going on here?" "Christina, please explain to me why a woman who's just had surgery is in a state of hysteria. You were tasked with keeping her calm and happy, and you are completely failing in your duties." The stone wall spoke, and there was no way to stop it. Max was angry and preparing to fire the caregiver he had just hired. "No severance pay. Christina, you can pack up and leave this house. You're fired." He said those words in his usual cold voice. There was no trace of the man who had laughed at his mother's stupid jokes that morning. "Max, stop. First, let us explain to you everything that happened. And then we'll see if you can fire someone or take it back." Helen's voice sounded equally harsh and cold, and so the son simply froze. The first thing the woman in Serbia showed him was a picture of Helen's mom standing exactly in them. The son knew the story that once long ago his father had given his mother a unique gift. Few people in those days could please their spouses with exclusive white gold earrings. He also knew that those earrings had been irretrievably lost during the terrible fire in which their little sister had died. And now, when he saw them in his mother's hands, the man was speechless. He couldn't believe his own eyes and didn't want to believe his own ears. Until his mother told him that she had found the second earring in one of the stores. Max was sure that Christina had simply made up the story. But there was nothing to reproach her for. Everything really did match up. Could it be that this girl, who as recently as yesterday morning had returned tail and allowed herself to assert her own point of view, had turned out to be his own sister? The girl who years ago, they all believed, had died in a car accident. The man's eyes filled with tears. He let his feelings come out, hugged Christina, and asked for her forgiveness. He had no idea what to say in such situations, so he simply apologized. He felt guilty for speaking rudely to Christina during the interview and at the airport. Max realized he had become completely confused. "My favorite girls, pull yourselves together. We are waiting for a wonderful holiday dinner, prepared and Lisa." Imagine her hysterics if she finds out that Helen suddenly has a grown-up daughter. Max laughed. He hugged his mom and sister and motioned for them to come downstairs. As they opened the door, they heard Alex and Maria enter the house. "Let's not say anything to them yet. Let Maria show her sister what she can do." Max laughed and winked at his mother. "Don't worry, no one will give you offense in this house. But I must say that your sister is a very spoiled person. She doesn't tolerate competition, and she's used to having all the attention in this family," Helen warned. She still couldn't believe that this was happening to her, that the daughter she had mourned and thought dead for over 20 years was alive and standing next to her. There were hysterical screams coming from the first floor. Maria was sharing the events of the day. It turns out that Alex had spent all that time in the police station. He was proving to the law enforcement representatives that he had nothing to do with terrorist organizations, and what happened was just a stupid joke. His future mother-in-laws. Maria met Alex a few years ago. Then her mother insisted that Max paid for her sister's trip to a foreign camp. The girl was going through a breakup with her first love and badly needed positive emotions. Her son did not argue with Helen, but simply gave as much money as was needed to pay for the vacation and flight. Maria had a wonderful 2 weeks there, enjoying socializing with her peers and being under the close supervision of psychologists. To the surprise of the family, Maria did not pull any tricks, but she surprised everyone by the fact that after arriving home, she continued to communicate with one of the same vacationers. His name was Alex. His parents sent the boy on vacation after a hard study. Returning from the camp in France, Alex soon appeared on the doorstep of the house where Maria lived and said that he could not live without her. To say that the relatives were dumbfounded, nothing to say. Even Maria was in a slight shock. However, the young people made a promise not to do anything stupid and kept it for several years. Between them, more and more often began to talk about marriage. And a few months ago, Alex introduced Maria to his parents. They spent 2 weeks in France, from where they flew to Germany and returned with Helen. It was hard to explain why Maria and Max's mother didn't take this man seriously. His appearance truly resembled that of a clown. When Helen decided to pull a prank at the airport, she had no idea where it would lead. Maybe it was for the best. Let the guy learn to get out of difficult situations on his own. Especially since life together with her daughter is a series of difficult situations and endless adventures. Alex spent the whole day today to explain to the police in broken English that he is a good French citizen who came to visit his fiancée's family. The difficulty was that Maria was not allowed into the office until she had legal status. Spouses have no right to take part in investigations and proceedings. However, it was money that helped them cope with the difficulties. Thanks to her brother, Maria never needed it. No, she didn't sit on her brother's neck. Maria held a decent position in his company, and it should be noted, reached this position. Not through family connections, but only through her own knowledge and skills. Max always reprimanded her severely in meetings. If the occasion arose, but also honestly praised her for her professional accomplishments. The only indulgence that the boss allowed himself to regularly please his sister was a salary an order of magnitude higher than that of her colleagues. This topic was off limits for discussion in the office. The employees knew that Max did not tolerate gossip. The man was always ready for open conversations and boldly responded to any complaints from the employees. If he noticed that someone was whispering in the corners, he always called for a conversation, which was usually followed by dismissal. When the passion downstairs had subsided, Christina and Helen went down to the first floor. "Hello, mine," never waning. The mother said wryly to Maria, "Do you have any idea what Ali Imam had to go through? Why did you make this circus? Explain it to me, please." Max intervened in the conversation. He really liked the prank, and although he treated Alex respectfully, he didn't try to hide the fact that Mom came up with a funny prank. Everyone understood that for such a joke, a French citizen could be deported to his country without the right to return. Then Maria would have become the wife of a French Decembrist. Surely his sister would have boarded the first plane to Paris and sought a date with a persistent troublemaker. These thoughts made Max laugh. He laughed loudly, which caused astonishment among the others, and hurried to share his thoughts. After everyone had laughed quite a bit, Maria asked a very appropriate question. Since when would a simple caregiver sit at the table with them and listen to them indulge in family memories? Indeed, every dinner with the family, Max, Maria, and Helen was filled with warm conversations about their father, their childhood, and their family traditions. The children, as Helen used to call them, told her their secrets, and she, in turn, made a surprised face and made them believe that until now, she did not even suspect what had happened. Helen was in no hurry to please Maria with the fact that she had a younger sister, despite the fact that she had grown up a spoiled girl. She was kind and sympathetic at heart, and always responded warmly to her mother's requests to visit her sister's grave in the cemetery. When asked why Christina was given a seat at the table, her mother replied that she could get dizzy and had to get used to having someone there to support her and help her, but she was satisfied with that explanation. Despite the insulting grimace on her face towards Christina, she softened nonetheless. The girls assigned a seat next to Alex, who, despite the joke organized by Helen, arrived for dinner with a gorgeous bouquet of flowers for his future mother-in-law. He was still wearing 2 tight jeans. What caused another fit of laughter when he appeared on the doorstep? It seemed that today's surprises had come to an end, but it wasn't. The front door swung open, and the one who had swept past Christina yesterday and given her a less than welcoming look appeared on the doorstep. She seemed to have come straight from a business meeting. In another strict suit, styled hair, stilettos, and an unchanged file folder in hand. "Good evening. I'm sorry, I didn't realize Max had nice guests. We were supposed to spend the evening together, and especially frozen on the threshold, because no one invited her into the house. And what's more, there were no dishes for her at the table." What was especially unlike Max, if he invited someone to visit, he was always zealous to make sure that the guest was comfortable. He didn't seem to care about the businesswoman's comfort at all. "Jenna, I think I've made it clear to you that I'm busy tonight." Max said these words in such a cold voice that Christina felt horror, just like the day of the interview. However, the whole situation brought joy to Helen and Max. Looking into his mother's eyes, let her enjoy talking to the unexpected guest. "Well, what are you, son?" heaping a girl on the doorstep. "Come in, dear Jenna. Visitors are always welcome in our home." Affectionately. "What was that?" Completely out of character for a mother, Helen said. She looked like a rainbow hostess now, ready to feed anyone. But Jenna had no idea what a dangerous trap she had fallen into quite willingly. "Meet Maria, my daughter Alex, and her boyfriend." "Well, Max, Christina." Helen did not have time to finish, as she saw on Jenna's face irritation and contempt. The girl immediately reported that she could not stand it when servants sit at the same table with the owners. She compared such behavior with the situation when an ordinary employee took part in important negotiations on an equal footing with the boss. By the way, Jenna was that ordinary employee. She brewed not the most delicious coffee and brought Max papers to sign. She got her position only because of her long legs and the beautiful, even smile of Max's partner. Solid men like to be greeted by a friendly girl. The tired, tortured secretary who had served the company since its inception and was the boss's right-hand woman. Helen, realizing that a stone had been thrown into the vegetable garden, her newfound daughter decided to remind the florist that she was just a simple rank-and-file employee who had just broken into a board meeting and was trying to take an active part. But the girl didn't even seem to pay attention to the remark. She was engrossed in trying to draw Max's attention to herself. Those sitting at the table suddenly looked at each other and laughed loudly. Everyone remembered the incident at the airport. Jenna sat, not realizing what was going on, and just drank water, courteously served, and Lisa, on the girl's luck, the housekeeper, brought dinner. And the family was somewhat distracted by the tweaking of the guest. When everyone was fed and satisfied, Alex asked permission to speak. Helen realized that something was about to transpire that she still wasn't ready to hear. Indeed, the young man confessed that he had loved her daughter for a very long time and wished Maria to become his lawfully wedded wife. He immediately hastened to assure the members of his new family that he had no intention of taking the girl to France. Alex applied for citizenship and even found a permanent job. A large company was actively looking for a professional, experienced programmer and was ready to pay decent money for Alex's knowledge. Maria cried from joy and surprise. She did not even suspect that her boyfriend was coming to USA not just for fun, but with the most serious intentions. The girl responded by agreeing to the marriage proposal and began to accept congratulations. At that moment, she allowed Christina to hug herself. If the mother has penetrated trust to this person, then she has nothing to share with the nurse. Jenna also allowed herself to make a congratulatory speech. The girl decided to take the initiative in her own hands and told those gathered at the table that she and Max were in a close enough relationship and could also announce the wedding. At that moment, you should have just seen Max's face. His eyes turned cold and angry. "Well, my son proposed to you, but he didn't tell me anything," Helen asked snidely. This person's statement did not cause her any emotion except laughter. The woman realized that her son was an intelligent and responsible man who could pay attention to a person like Jenna. Only in one single instance, she had never been a prude, and realized that it would be better to have a temporary relationship with such a doll than a year of loneliness. Maria jumped with laughter. She realized that after what Jenna had said, she would only have to pack her things from her desk and leave the company's walls forever. Christina also realized that. She was ashamed of herself, but the girl was even happy about this outcome. She did not like this businesswoman even before she ran into her in the lobby. Only Alex was indifferent to the story. He did not understand Russian speech well and laughed only because his future spouse did. Max got up from the table, approached Jenna, and sharply pushed her chair away. "I'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. In my office with a letter of resignation. I made no promises about our marriage. There's no need to mislead my family. They might think I'm crazy for deciding to commit my life to you." The girl blushed and, trying to object to what she heard, was quickly dispensed with. She didn't even say goodbye, jumped out of the house, slammed the door of her own car. It was heard how sharply she moved. Will there be any more news? Maria burst into laughter and couldn't stop. Helen said slowly, "Today this news struck me to the core." Her voice a few minutes ago joyful suddenly became serious. "Mom, something happened in my heart. The operation didn't go well. What's the matter?" She wouldn't have survived if anything bad had happened to her mother. No, my girl is fine." Helen hurried to reassure her daughter. She asked everyone present to just listen carefully to the story the mother wanted to tell her children. When she started the story about how all the family was eagerly waiting for the birth of their sister, Maria exhaled. She was ready to listen to the story as many times as she wanted, knowing that her mother was okay. So Lisa brought a large pot of tea and joined the large family. She had long since become a full member of the family, but she never allowed herself to sit down at the table with everyone else. Only after dinner was served and the kitchen was in order, she made her favorite tea and let herself indulge in memories, along with everyone else. Helen spoke at length today, and with a special feeling, everyone at the table had tears running down their cheeks. It seemed that even Alex, who could hardly perceive Russian speech, was penetrated by the story. And there were quiet sobs. When the mother got to the point where she discovered an earring given by her father in a store in Germany, she cried. Christina allowed herself to intervene and continue the story, which caused Maria's surprise. Only Max seemed to remain calm. In his heart, he was uncontrollably glad that the girl for whom so many tears had been shed was alive and well. She had come to their house on her own. One should thank fate and God for that. Christina began her story, and not everyone could understand how it related to what Helen had just told. Couldn't understand until it was about the Serbs. The girl pulled 2 earrings out of the purse she had thoughtfully brought with her. It was them, the ones her mother had been looking at for a long time in the picture. Max had once suggested that she order the exact same ones from a jeweler. Helen flatly refused. She said she didn't plan to enter the same river twice. It was a memory of her father, and let it remain his memory forever. Then the son bought his mother an extraordinarily beautiful set of exactly that ring. This morning, Christina noticed the ward on her hand. Upon realizing what was happening, Maria cried, unashamed of her tears, and hugged Christina tightly. Through her tears, she laughed and stated that it was a good thing they didn't have time to socialize. She has a terrible temper, and now she would have to apologize for any rudeness for sure. Now she would only have to apologize for the fact that all this time none of them had known that she was the youngest and most beloved sister alive. The evening seemed to be endless. When the tea was finished, the whole family moved to the floor of the fireplace. The children surrounded their mother and had long conversations about what their lives had been like. Christina told much about her past. It was already Maria and Max. They were tormented by guilt that their sister didn't have everything she owned. As the time passed midnight, Helen declared that she was immensely tired for today. Even though she felt strong and healthy after the surgery, such a shock was not easy to bear. She went to bed and insisted that Christina would definitely spend that night in her bedroom. The girl promised that as soon as they got ready for bed, she would come to her mother's room. Alex also apologized and withdrew. He had not just endured a hard flight, but was having a hard time getting used to the time difference. No one dared to take offense at him. Maria and Max wanted to spend time alone with their sister. Max hugged his sisters and suggested to celebrate such an event with a glass of champagne. It was a real miracle, which happens only once in a lifetime. And then not everyone. Sitting at the table, they began to discuss the future. That Christina was moving into her brother's house. It was agreed without reservation. Then there was the question of who would take care of Mom. She needed a nurse again, a girl who had just found a family. She dreamed of it all her life. She declared that she wasn't going to quit her hard-won position. She and her brother laughed and told Maria about how hard it was to get an interview. Max's. They sat at the table in the kitchen for a long time, sipping champagne and making plans for the future. None of them so happy did not know that in the morning, when they woke up, life would not be the same. None of them suspected that the mother who had just found her dead daughter would not be able to stand such happiness. When Helen stated that she was tired and wished to go to bed, she was not lying. The woman was indeed feeling exhausted. Moreover, Her heart ached again, but Chisa did not want to spoil the children's joy of the family reunion. She reached the bedroom, sat down on the bed, and passed out. Helen didn't have time to take the pill that could have saved her life. The children discovered the body in the early hours of the morning, as they were escorting Christina to her new bedroom. No one knew that the next day a hurt Jenna would go to the police and file a report that Max had been molesting her regularly. No one knew the cops would come for Alex too. Money doesn't always solve problems. The case of the explosion at the international airport will not be so easy to solve. But all this will happen only tomorrow, when the new day comes. And today, these three were so happy, sitting at the kitchen table, drinking champagne, and could not believe that after 20 years their family was reunited. Max and Maria believed that the father had helped the children find each other. Before he died, he announced that he was going in search of his dead daughter. When the bottle of delicious French drink was drunk, the young people hugged each other tightly and decided to walk their sister to the bedroom in friendship.
Subscribe and click the bell.
She's so uncomplicated. Ethan smiled, and his smile was surprisingly gentle and dreamy. Who? John wondered. They were in a nightclub, but the loud music didn't stop them from talking. Separate rooms with excellent noise insulation were provided for solvent clients. The guys were not just solvent clients, but also regular and very generous with tips. Therefore, this small but very cozy office with panoramic windows and a mirror ceiling was, you could say, assigned to them. So who's the uncomplicated one? Ethan snapped out of his dreamy reverie and for some reason whispered, "Slaga, she is such a..." Listen, I honestly haven't met anyone like her. Her father owns a tire shop, a businessman, a hard worker, and the girl is not spoiled by life at all. I asked her where she likes to vacation. So she told me, you know what she said? You won't believe it. She says that at the cottage father says fishing, and they then from this fish caught, food cooked, fry it, and with boiled potatoes eat and soup still. Liar. John stared at me. You're a fool. She's playing a joke on you, and you believe it. What kind of girl would have fun like that, as if she's already retired? That's ridiculous. No, wait, I see what's going on. Where's their summer house? Did you ask? Maybe in Cyprus, maybe. No. It's just a little tree, 40 miles out of town, inherited from my grandparents. And that's where he and his daddy have their place of power. They go fishing, pick mushrooms, berries. Listen, she can make jam, and she dries mushrooms and pickles them. What a great girl! She says she starts her mornings with exercise and douses herself with cold water to avoid getting sick. No, but have you ever seen such girls? Not in the movies, but for real. Everybody else has a fitness center and a personal trainer and a healthy diet, and she's exercising in cold water. Aha! And fried fish and chips, plus jam. You're looking for exotic, aren't you? John asked me glumly. I don't even want to ask where you found it, but I'll advise you as a friend. Get rid of her before it's too late. You don't know these country girls, and they're clutching she'll grab you and that's it. You won't realize how married you'll be, and then you won't get divorced. She'll grab everything she can reach, and you'll be left without pants. Oh, come on, don't make me sad. Ethan grinned. You haven't seen her, Clara. She's like a Cinderella, friendly, kind, and good at everything. Her eyes are like this, and all the time she seems to be surprised. I'll order her a coffee and a cake, and she'll have a happy look on her face. At the Moody's, take her hand in the dark, and she is already shining all over. And when I kissed her for the first time, I think she then even the whole night could not sleep. Knave, she's so cute and sweet, you could fall in love with her. Did you fall in love? No. Ethan wrinkled his nose and looked like a hedgehog about to sneeze, but then changed his mind. What kind of love? I've been with so many girls, I don't think I'm capable of falling in love anymore. You remember Thumbelina, don't you? I got bored beforehand. That's 100% me. And the girl? What about the girl? Well, beautiful but funny, but you'll meet another, even prettier, even funnier. If you fall in love with every girl, you won't have enough days in your life. John suddenly winked conspiratorially at his buddy. Listen, doesn't she have a girlfriend? Because you tell me so deliciously, I even thought I might be missing something in life. Jam, for example. You look for it. Ethan said arrogantly and burst out laughing. Come on, don't be so slow. Go to any cheaper club. There are 100 of them per square meter. And all hungry, you'll treat them to a cocktail and take them to your place. John remained silent, and Ethan suddenly felt sickened by his own cynicism. Ethan had been living in a sticky jam for a month now. It had started out so nice, so funny. Clara, in her colored sundresses, with her long hair and perpetually surprised look, her willingness to admire everything he said, to rejoice at any, even the cheapest gift. Ethan sometimes bought the girl the cheapest chocolates on purpose, just to test her reaction, but she was as happy about them as if she'd been given diamonds. She was so sweetly embarrassed and always asked him to turn off the lights. Every day she wished him a good morning. Yes, everything was so light, funny, plush, like a video clip of a couple in love releasing into the sky, balloons, hearts, and then, holding hands, going to an ice cream parlor. And then it happened, and I had to thrash around, twist and turn, come up with original moves, lie, lie, lie. Lying was the most painful of all. Ethan was more and more confused, with no idea how to get out of the horror that had come over him and pinned him to the ground. The horror looked exactly like the two purple stripes, parallel to each other, on a pregnancy test. It was the test that the idiotic Clara had presented to him by calling and scheduling an urgent appointment. Come right now, please, she asked. I have such news. In short, come. What's wrong? He asked, surprised. Have the aliens taken over the planet? Ethan, this is not a phone call. Come quickly. It's very important. I'm waiting for you. The girl didn't bother to explain. Ethan was very worried then. The demand, the urgency. It was something out of Clara's repertoire if she said it was urgent. Intuition, of course, was not dormant. Ethan suddenly remembered how, a couple weeks ago, he and Clara had decided to go out of town to a wild beach and had had a wonderful time there until late in the evening. They didn't even want to leave, and she fell in love with the place and kept repeating, I will live here. I like it here so much that I want to stay here forever. Ethan understood her, he wanted to, but he wanted it to be like this. Warm but not hot weather, the water glistening, and for Clara to walk around in her bathing suit, and for them to be as old as they are today, 18 and 19. He would build a shawl then, right here on top of the hill, and in the evenings they would burn fires and drink cheap sweet wine. A picture to remember. He said out loud, What is it? I want to say that I will remember this day and keep it in detail, like a photograph of you and me living here all our lives and not growing old for a minute. It's like a snapshot, only not with a camera, just with your eyes. He kept in his memory this picture of eternal summer and eternal happiness. However, there were no pharmacies nearby, but Ethan somehow hoped that it would be lucky. And if he hoped in vain, oh, not for good. All this urgency. Oh, not good. What if the wild beach left them a mark in the form off? What the hell is this? Maybe Clara just saw a cockroach and now he's afraid to move, or a mouse. He didn't notice how he accelerated his steps towards the girl's house. Whatever happened there, it was better to find out as soon as possible and not to be tormented by doubts. And maybe it would turn out that there was nothing to worry about. Maybe the girl just needs some help. You know, like move a couch. A couch would be nice. He ran up the stairs to find out, finally, what was the cause of Clara's anxiety. Here's already her floor. Ethan didn't even have time to ring the doorbell. But Slaga jumped out into the entryway in a bathrobe, clutching in her fist a strip of paper with 2 dashes on it. Ethan tried hard not to think about where the test had been before it was picked up. Look, look! The girl shrieked, smiling so contentedly that Ethan immediately wanted to run away. Of course, Clara, with her usual stupidity, didn't notice anything and kept shoving the object of her idiotic pride under his nose. Well, what to do now? I wonder what kind of reaction she expects. That he, too, would jump with delight, pick her up in his arms and start twirling her around? Or fall to his knees and start kissing her still flat belly like in the movies? Yeah, a bad movie. Ethan, what's wrong with you? Is that your face? You're not happy. She finally figured it out. I should be happy. But are you happy? It's our baby, yours and mine. Isn't it great? Yours is. Ethan blurted out the first thing that came to his mind. But as for me, that's a moot point. He knew he was saying a nasty, insulting thing. He knew that Clara didn't deserve them, but he was saying them, and now, at this very moment, he wanted them to be true. How do I know? Maybe I wasn't your only one. You didn't swear fidelity to me, did you? Maybe you were seeing someone else at the same time. I wouldn't be surprised at all. How? How? Why? Because. Do you have proof that you didn't go out with someone else? That you only went out with me? No? Well, I don't have any proof either. So why should I believe you? The girl's huge eyes instantly filled with tears. Ethan, look. There's 2 stripes, that means. I know what it means without you telling me. It's okay, it happens. But what does that have to do with me? Who else? Ethan, what's wrong with you? I'm not with anyone else. Here's a test. Check it out. Don't give me that test. I've seen it. I'm not interested in what it says, Ethan. He asked, squeamishly pulling away. Well, where? Show me. Clara slammed her eyes shut resentfully. A crystal tear ran down her rounded cheek, her eyes large, open, amber-colored. At first, they seemed childishly enthusiastic and naive. Where had it all gone? It was as if the enchantment had dissipated in an instant, leaving only the surprise of his own blindness. Where was he looking before? Naivety, delight. Now he realized it was not enthusiasm, but elementary stupidity. Too bad it was too late for him. I had no one else. The girl whispered in a trembling voice. You know you haven't. How would I know that? Ethan started up. Do you think I've been following you? I mean, who else could have been involved? I'm just saying. You go to the doctor for an abortion. If there's anything there, you have to pay. Fine, I'll pay. But then we break up because I don't want to do it again. Especially from a girl I've never been sure of. You'll get pregnant again, and then you'll want to pin it on me. No way. To the doctor, there was a voice from behind the door. She's going to register to observe the pregnancy. Who the hell is that? The boy was confused. The door of the apartment opened, and Ethan saw a man in old sweatpants on the doorstep. Apparently, this character was the future grandfather of the 2 stripes and the daddy of the dopey, blissful one. In addition to the pants, The man was dressed in a shedding t-shirt, which favorably emphasized his emerging potbelly. His vast baldness was a strange contrast to his thick dark mustache. His gaze was ferocious, a real monster. "Good evening, young man." The monster said hello politely and without any transition, grabbed Ethan by the shirt on his chest and pulled him closer. "It's going to kill him." The boy thought and squeezed his eyes shut just in case. "Definitely will. My name is Christopher." The monster growled, breathing in the guy's face. His breath smelled of fish and something else alcoholic. Beer, probably. "Ethan," the boy wheezed. The shirt on his chest pulled taut and rattled threateningly. "Nice to meet you," continued the monster who called himself Christopher, continuing the conversation. "As you may have already guessed, I am Clara's father. Before you say anything in your defense, I feel it is my duty to inform you that I will not tolerate rudeness." This almost refined politeness, combined with the creepy paw rubbing his shirt and the horrifying face in close proximity to Ethan's face, had a paralyzing effect. The guy didn't dare open his eyes, and he didn't even think about trying to break free. "If you hurt her, you hurt me, and it's dangerous to hurt me," growled the monster. "And now a second warning. You will marry my daughter, because my grandson must be born in a legal marriage. Maybe you have not yet had time to propose marriage, Clara, as befits a decent man. Well, now is the time to do it now. That's what you were going to do, like a real man, not a trashy little bastard, right? Am I right? Am I right?" With each new phrase, the monster shook the guy vigorously. "You're right. Yes, yes, of course. That's a smart boy." Christopher, unclasping at last his mighty hand, carefully smoothed Ethan's shirt and patting him paternally on the cheek. "Because if you had been a shameless scoundrel, capable of abandoning a pregnant woman, I would have made a cutlet of you and fed you to my dog. And now I dare not disturb you anymore." The monster smiled and disappeared behind the door. Ethan slid along the wall and sat down on the floor. "Is your father crazy?" he asked. "Or does he always act like that? Or only with guests?" The girl glanced at the door and pressed her finger to her lips. "Speak quietly." "Daddy's hearing is phenomenal. He can hear everything through 3 doors. You'd better be quiet. We're getting married then." Ethan mumbled and covered his face with his hands. It's a nightmare. It was impossible to believe what was happening. The next day, Christopher personally drove the couple to the marriage ceremony and made sure that the applications were written in the proper form and accepted as they should be. At the same time, he kept glancing at Ethan as if he expected the groom to run away or act crazy. "Clara said you're not a poor guy. He said it after the applications were filed. Of course, it's good to have something to live on while my wife is at home with the baby. Well, how are you doing? What do you do for a living?" "Where? Nothing," mumbled the guy. "Work is bad now. They pay me a trifle everywhere." Christopher nodded. "That's true. But no one ever got rich on a paycheck like that. You should try to organize something yourself." "All right, it's solvable. But what do you live on?" "My parents give me a little. They've got." "Well, I see. I see. Don't go on." The future father-in-law waved away. "Well, Clara?" He looked at his daughter. "Congratulations. You found yourself a lazy man with an ego and a slacker. And this daughter," Christopher unceremoniously pointed his finger at Ethan. "This one, look closely, is your future husband. What do you think of that?" Well, the girl lowered her eyes. "Things are different now, aren't they?" "Right, Ethan. He's a family man now. I think he'll be able to work and provide for me and the baby." "You think so?" Dad grinned. Well, think. It's my business, but if you want to know what I think, I'll tell you this. This Major doesn't like to work and doesn't know how to work. If he could do something, he wouldn't be on his parents' back. And if he didn't know how to do something, but he loved it, he'd be trying to learn something. But that was before, Daddy, and now. He doesn't love you either, Christopher went on. And his father is, I apologize, like a pig, a snow-white swan. Come on, Dad, shut up. You asked for my opinion, so stay out of my way. And here's my advice to you, my daughter. Send him away. Right after the baby's born, he's no use to you and won't be. This way you'll have a child in marriage, and you'll get rid of the stone around your neck. Girl, you're beautiful, you're smart. You'll find yourself a nice guy with a head and a heart. And this one, he glanced contemptuously at Ethan. He'll never be a man again. He's all right on the face, handsome, but there's nothing good about him except his face. The face changes with time. Ethan gritted his teeth. He's in trouble. Now this car mechanic with 3 grades of education is going to sit there and insult him. Dad, don't, asked Clara, pointing her eyes at the groom. It's unpleasant for him. And in general, of course, you have a lot of life experience, but maybe you're wrong. But it's unlikely. Can I, said Ethan, who up to this moment had been gloomily silent, stop insulting me. I'm your daughter's fiancé and the father of your grandson. Who gave you the right to behave like this? Hiya, nobody yet. If you want to prove your worth, get a job. Think about a place to live. And by the way, start taking care of your fiancé. She's pregnant. She needs rest, proper nutrition, light emotions. The doctor said Clara needs fruit and vitamins. Go and think about it and get her that. For starters, the next day, Ethan was walking through the yard of his fiancé's house and could not answer himself the question, what was he doing here? A heavy bag of fruit and vitamins for Clara was weighing down his arm. Humanitarian aid for pregnant fools and very heavy. Christopher opened the door for him himself and held out his hand for the bag. Did you bring fruit? Good for you, come on. Clara is not at home now. I sent her to the cottage in the morning. Let her get some fresh air. She'll be back on Thursday. I'll tell her you came by. Ethan was not invited to come in, and he remained standing, staring dumbfoundedly at the cheap sodden door. Why am I here? Again he asked himself, but there was no definite answer to that question. Most likely because not to come to leave Clara, no matter how stupid she was, would be to agree with the characterization that this disgusting type, her father, had given him. And also because he was scared. This really Christopher, a man without a tower, such a man will unscrew his head and then surrender to the authorities, but only unscrewed, it is no longer screwed back in place. Screw it all and skip town right now. And then what? Daddy has long ago and quite unambiguously made it clear to his children that either after receiving a certificate of higher education, they stay to work at his company, or they cannot count on the inheritance and at least some financial support. This means that to run away is like agreeing to a miserable existence, to be lost on the streets, and to fend for themselves. Ethan shakes his head, as if he hoped to shake her out of her fears and any other unnecessary thoughts. I had to think of some way out of this, and as soon as possible. But, as it turned out, no reasonable ideas appeared, and it was clear that he could not do without his sister's advice. Clara stood at the window, watching Ethan nervously pacing the sidewalk in front of the house, probably thinking about something, and certainly nervous. He sent you some fruit. My father shouted from the room. I left it on the table in the kitchen. And why did you deceive him that I'm at the cottage?" asked the girl. I heard. Christopher stood on the threshold of the room, leaned his shoulder against the jamb, and looked intently, very seriously at his daughter. "I wanted to buy you some time," he said, "for you to think calmly whether you want him or not. You see what he's like. He's neither fish nor flesh. A slug. Then why did you ask him to marry you?" "I pressured him, of course. I couldn't listen to him go on and on about you. But tell me something. Do you really want to marry him, that lazy bum? A child without a husband isn't very nice, but if you look at it another way, maybe it's better to have no husband than that dry fruit of yours. I love him," I confessed. "You love him, of course. It's understandable. While you were dating, hugging, kissing, all was well with you. But it's the same for everyone until there are no responsibilities, no children. He's a handsome guy, looking in love, holding your hand, talking nicely. Love, carrots, all those beautiful things. And how did things get complicated? So where did it go, his love? I heard everything. He didn't tell you, Clara. Even though we didn't plan it, we'll get through it and I'll be with you, no matter what you decide, did he? He didn't, did he? No. He started talking about how the baby might not be his and other nasty stuff that made me want to throw up. And I'm not squeamish. I was. So let me ask you a different question. Will you have something to love him for when the passion passes? And it will pass. Can you believe me? There will remain the character of a man, his deeds, for what you can respect. You can despise, you can love, and you can hate. Will there be something to love him for then? Clara lowered her head and bit her lip. Daddy, she said after a short silence. I don't know now. Ethan was the prince from the TV series. Tall, slender, dark-eyed in his movements, the lightness of a predator and the fluidity of water flowing from one position to another as naturally, easily, beautifully as if a river were flowing. And his speech was like a river, as smooth, unhurried, and sometimes like a noisy stream. Clara thought he must smell of water. Fresh, clean, fresh from the spring, but it was the opposite. When she hugged Ethan, she could always smell the woods, resin and herbs and something else, but it was so intoxicating that it seemed impossible to break the embrace. To stand like this, pressed together, and breathe in the smell of my beloved. Inhale it and do not stop, do not get distracted. You're a river, and it smells like a real forest. She used to say, "Why a river? I don't know. They say I'm a river, but I'm not." But you didn't. You're like a river. You've come into my life and filled it all with you. So you're a river? No, I'm just yours. How many of these conversations have they had? How many unbreakable embraces? How can you forget that now? And now Ethan was nothing like his recent self. Where did he get all this insolence, meanness, anger? The way he kept saying he didn't know if she'd been faithful to him or if she'd gone out with others, as if she could look at others. She didn't notice anyone but him. Clara still loved him, but realized more and more clearly she loved her memories of Ethan and the real him she didn't know at all. She doesn't want to know. I don't want to be a daddy. I don't want to be a daddy. Ethan kept repeating himself. With each word he banged his head against the soft back of the chair. Nancy was quietly looking at her fresh manicure and didn't seem to notice what was happening. She was silently worrying about when her brother would finally calm down enough to talk to her. Ethan groaned for a few more minutes, then lifted his head. "Why don't you say something?" he asked in a perfectly normal voice. "Don't you see your brother's life is a disaster? You could have said something, consoled him, given him some advice. Nancy shrugged her shoulders. Ethan, you're a fool. Aphoristically, she said. It's pretty clear, he said. What do we do now? That gastropub has a crazy daddy. He'll kill me, and he won't regret it. You. Is that how you talk about the girl you love? I never loved her. Ethan moaned. She's cute, she's pretty, and I got carried away for a while. But what kind of love? You have to pay for pleasure. Nancy said admonishingly. As for everything else, however, for stupidity, for ignorance, for beauty and talent. But pleasure usually costs more than anything else. Thank you for the informative lecture. The brother bowed. But what should I do, huh? So I don't have to go back to it. The sister began slowly, looking up at the ceiling. I warned you that your games in bad neighborhoods to the suburbs and affairs in bedroom communities will not lead to good. But since you didn't listen to me, and you, she pointed her finger at her brother. You didn't. Now we need to find out what options we have to solve the problem. The first option is to offer the girl money for an abortion and make sure she gets proper care and maintenance. Dad, tell her that horror, spontaneous miscarriage, but you will cope. You can overcome this grief together, supporting each other. You don't know that fool, Clara. Ethan said glumly. There's no way she's going to go along with this. People like her have only one goal in this life, to have a bunch of children like a pig and sit among them contentedly while a man works for her and all this litter. So this option is out. Nancy stated nonchalantly. Let's move on to the second option. It's simpler, but also more complicated. Say it. Leave everything as it is and raise the child together. Wow. One option is better than the other. Do you have any other interesting ideas? A third option. I haven't thought of a third one yet. Maybe I should just drop off the radar. Sorely suggested the guy. Why? It's quite possible. Just change your phone number, leave, and that's it. There'd be no place for us to cross paths with her then. He grinned. We'll be on different paths. And her dad's a crazy tire man. He won't be able to find me. Nancy shook her head. No, my dear brother, that won't do. I won't say the platitudes about the fact that if you do, you'll lose your father's financial support in no time. That's half the trouble, if you ask me. Money can be earned. The trouble is, you're incapable of taking care of yourself. And do you know why? And why is that? Asked my brother. Because the created problems need to be solved, and you just want to merge quietly, disappear. Yes, almost all men do that. Ethan was indignant. You'd think. And that's why they almost all lie as they have to. The girl said, they work for miserable wages, live in shanty towns, and in the evenings drink the cheap liquor they're sold under the guise of beer. That's pretty much all of yours. You want to be like that. What's that got to do with it? It's got everything to do with it. Nancy sighed. That it's not those who run away from problems who live well, but those who aren't afraid to face them. Those who solve them. You have a problem, and you want to run away from it. In that case, how long after you get your inheritance will you be on the street? If, of course, you get it at all, and not crawl back under your parents' wing after you've been fired for stupidity from your supermarket cashier position? Inheritance. Ethan grumbled. What's there to talk about now? Dad's health is good. That's fine. It seems to be as far away from the inheritance as the moon. But it'll come sooner or later. And frankly, I wouldn't want you to give up your share and then settle down to support me, said the sister. There was so much cold certainty in her tone that Ethan felt uneasy. Nancy was, unlike her brother, the pride of the family, a strategist's mindset, independence, the ability to make quick decisions and put them into action. and a persistence so persistent that God forbid she should dream of it. A robot, not a woman. Ethan joked, but deep down he admired his sister. That's why he ran to her for advice whenever he had the slightest difficulty. Usually she managed, thinking quickly, assessing the situation correctly, and giving excellent advice. But today, it seemed that even Nancy could not give him any advice, but she spurred his own imagination. "You're a good girl, sister," he said and clapped his hands together. "I think I've figured out what to do." The beer was disgustingly diluted. Ethan forced himself to swallow what was already in his mouth, but he set the mug aside. The bulky man sitting across from him was also his future father-in-law. He looked at the guy with bewilderment. "Do not like it?" he asked. "You'll have to excuse me, Christopher," replied Ethan. "You know, I'm not very good with beer." But I couldn't explain to this fat and aging man that beer was at least something you could try at Oktoberfest before it became too popular. Well, or at least in the Czech Republic. And what you can buy for pennies at the supermarket is not beer. It's rat poison. Suit yourself. He smiled. But I like to drink beer in the evening at work. You know, you get tired, so here it is. He lifted the bottle. Relaxes me, relieves stress, and puts me in a positive frame of mind. Ethan nodded politely. That's what my father says. Christopher immediately seized on the mention. He's a good man, your father, a hard worker. By the way, it's about time we got to know each other. What do you think? Because look, you and Clara are about to get married. You'll soon become parents, and we haven't even seen the matchmakers yet. It's not right. Yes? Ethan mumbled uncertainly. But, you know, we have such a family, well, family is family. The man interrupted him. Whatever they are, they're our own. You just bring them to us, and we'll make friends. Ethan was silent. You're in trouble, you idiot. You're in trouble. He should have listened to his sister, because she'd always told him to socialize with people in his own circle. And she was right on the money, you bastard. Well, what? The son of an entrepreneur. For a minute, a man with 2 higher education, who for fun is studying a 5th foreign language, may have in common with the daughter of the owner some lousy tire shop. He's just a common bastard anyway, and his daughter is the same, even if she is beautiful. Fool. Ethan berated himself for the umpteenth time this evening. If you want a taste of tart exoticism, you can have it. You know he lied, following a momentary burst of inspiration. I don't want you to meet my parents because I'm embarrassed, because they're, well, how should I put it, unusual people. Do they drink? Christopher raised his eyebrows. So, yeah, sure, it's a scary thing. But you can talk to them. If they want to quit, so I will organize treatment. I have a brother in New York just from addiction. He's a great doctor. He's got a whole clinic. Sure, yeah, I'll have to talk to them about it. Maybe they'll agree. That would be very good. It'll be fine, Ethan, as long as they want to live sober. The boy's got his head down. I'd like to postpone your acquaintance after all, especially since Clara's pregnant. Why should she go to all this trouble? She doesn't. But will they even come to the wedding? I guess they said they'd try, but they didn't make any firm promises. So we'll meet them in a week. Christopher shouted contentedly and took another big sip of his disgusting beer. The wedding was bearing down on Ethan at the speed of sound, but now he was looking forward to it. Each new day brought the lad closer to the coveted day, the release. The plan he had devised was simple and brilliantly thought out. They, that is, both Clara and her crazy father should be disappointed in me. He informed his sister. They should realize that it's better to be a single mother than to be married to a jerk like me. With tireless energy, He invented new ways to convince the bride, especially the future father-in-law, of his repulsive nature. "When do you think you'll get a job?" Christopher snapped at him. "Your bride is not an elephant. 2 years pregnant will not walk. But I'm looking for something." Ethan turned around. "I haven't found anything yet." "All right, you'll come to my tire shop. I'll teach you everything myself. I'll pay you well. If you work well, you'll start earning well." This conversation was repeated with depressing regularity, and in the end, Ethan saw a suitable occasion to demonstrate once again his unsuitability for family life. The only thing left to do was to summon up the courage. "I don't want to work." Bluntly, he declared one day to Clara and Christopher. "Why should I? My parents still give me money, and as soon as the child is born, I will also get an allowance from the state." How much did Clara find out? But no matter how much it is, it's still money. "And when the baby grows up?" asked the girl anxiously, looking at the groom. "The allowance will end, and the older the child, the more money is needed for him. The allowance will run out, but Clara, the parents won't," Ethan assured her. "And when it ends and but so then there will be an inheritance, and not a small one. By the way, I've already decided what we'll spend it on. We'll buy a big house and rent it out. It's for passive income. You do nothing and the money drips. It's beautiful. And you and I will go to Thailand. Life is very cheap there. We'll have enough rent money for 2 people. "Why 2? What about the baby? Or don't you plan to take him with you?" "Oh, Clara," Ethan said reproachfully, "you can't just think of yourself. Where do you want to take the baby? To Thailand?" "No, you can't even ask me that. Of course, you shouldn't take the child with you, because of the climate change, insects, kindergarten, school, medicine. In short, we'll leave him here. Let Grandma and Grandpa take care of him, and we'll go there to rest. We can come and visit once in a while." "But wait, Ethan." "Why?" Christopher stepped in. "I think it's a great plan. We can implement it. At least I'll make a man out of my grandson." "Daddy will not teach him anything good." "Right, Clara? You're starting again." Offended, Ethan said, and was silent for a long time. "That's how you try to offend me, to humiliate me." "And for what?" "Because I want to arrange everything so that Clara and the child would be happy. It's better to separate mother and child." Ethan was silent, but in his heart he felt that he had just won a small but important victory. Let them continue to think that he was a foolish, worthless, twitchy idiot from whom nothing could be expected. The next day he showed up at his fiancée's house drunk and diligently made noise in the entryway, until Christopher peeked out of the apartment and threatened to call the police. "Oh, come on, Dad." Ethan swung the bottle in a cartoonish fashion. Some of the wine spilled over his head and ran down his face. Ethan wiped away the alcohol and licked his palms. Christopher looked at him in disgust, which was exactly what the groom's script called for. "Oh," he said, smiling stupidly. "Can I call you Dad? Dad? Dad is just right. It's you." "Go home," Christopher advised him. "Go before I turn you in to the police." "So how do you go home?" Ethan was indignant. "I'm here to see my sweetheart." "Yes, Clara, yes, my little darling." Come here, come here." He pinched his bride's cheek. "I can't do anything without my Clara. I can't do anything without her, Daddy. I can't eat, I can't sleep, and I can't see you," said Christopher. "Get out, and don't you dare breathe your booze on my daughter. You'll come back when you're sober." Having waited a few more days after the drinking performance, Ethan again came to the guests and demanded a wedding present from his future father-in-law. "So you don't have to worry about what to get us." You know how they give us all kinds of awful junk, and then people agonize, they don't know where to put these gifts. So let's make a wish list, like some people do. Do what? Well, wish list means wish list. The guests will familiarize themselves with it, and then everyone will decide what to give from this list, and there are only the necessary things. I think you'll give us an apartment, he said, but I'm telling you right away, we need a 2-room apartment, a child. And what will your parents give? Christopher grinned. Maybe a summer house? You put it on your wish list. The child will need fresh air and vitamins. By the way, I've already looked at a nice cottage near the city. All communications are already pulled up, sewerage, water, electricity. There is near a pine forest, very clean air, and there is a garden. So we won't have to grow apples ourselves. Daddy? Clara laughed, but Ethan stopped her with a gesture. My parents will support us, he said habitually, adding a note of resentment to his voice. Isn't that enough for you? Christopher sighed and shook his head. Unfortunately, yes. If they had raised you to be a man, I'd be much more grateful, honestly. Clara, he turned to his daughter. Why do you need such a husband? Maybe you'll change your mind while there's still time. Daddy, the girl was confused. You wanted to have a child in marriage, didn't you? I did. Dad didn't disagree. But look at him, that father. Then such a father, maybe it's better. Clara, Ethan raised his head in offense. Do you see what's going on here? Your father wants to separate us. Are you just going to keep quiet? Let the child grow up without a father? Because you see, Christopher, you don't like me, do you? Clara smiled and waved her hands. Honestly, Ethan, it seems to me that you yourself want us to break up. I just don't understand why you won't say it openly. Because your crazy dad would cut me to ribbons. Ethan thought, but he only said one thing out loud. Don't be silly, the wedding's in a week. His sister was skeptical of Ethan's plan. It was her nature to be skeptical, she said, and she was probably right. But Ethan still believed in his own strength. Just a little more to go, just another week. They're already at their limit, barely hanging on. Just a little more patience, and the wedding day's in a week. My sister reminded me. Exactly. Ethan exclaimed happily. Exactly. That's just about the day of the wedding. And that's when I'm going to have my main gig, after which, oh, Nancy, I'm going to have such a party to celebrate my release. We'll go to the Canaries. We'll get some people together, rent a beach and party from morning till night till the ambulances come for us. Sister only gave me a sharp shoulder. Let's see if your idea doesn't fail, she snorted. Don't say gop until you've jumped over it. I've already jumped over, my dear sister. I have. Ethan laughed and hugged Nancy tightly. Clara was pensively going through the countless ruffles on her wedding dress, the dress itself hanging on its hinges on the closet door. Christopher looked into his daughter's room and sat down beside her. It's beautiful, he said, looking at the wedding dress. The ribbons, the lace. I never understood these wedding dresses. After all, for one day it is, and the wedding is off and in the closet. But beautiful. Yes, beautiful. Clara let go of the caressing fabric from her fingers and turned to her father. This is not what I dreamed of, Dad. Not at all. And now I'm looking at this dress and thinking, who am I going to wear it for? Ethan? The man felt that now the girl was ready to tell him something important, special, and kept silent, afraid to scare her mood. You know when I met Ethan, she said slowly, I felt like I'd met some kind of fairy prince, and not just because he was handsome. He took such good care of me, drove me to school, picked me up after class, fed me at restaurants. Then we went out, went to the movies. Every day? Dad asked. Every day. and it seemed to me that it was like going to the movies, and nothing about it made you suspicious. I did. It was only a couple of weeks later that I suddenly thought, doesn't he have any business of his own? I mean, we were together all the time. From morning till night. It's like he's got no school, no job, nothing. Nothing but fun. I asked him, and he looked at me so strangely and said, I can afford to rest. But here he is all resting and resting. Father snorted. And does not get bored? Yes, and when I found out I was pregnant, I thought that now everything would change for sure. Ethan will realize that now he can't go out like he used to, thinking only about pleasures. That a child will be here soon, and that's a responsibility. You have to think about the future. But the further I go, the more I realize that he's not going to think about anything. You see the way he acts, it's like he's getting cocky on purpose. Christopher didn't know what to say. And what can you say? Clara saw and said it all herself. You can still replay everything, he said softly. Just tell that bum there's no wedding. It's my fault, too. When I found out about it, I was furious. I thought I'd do anything, and the child would be born in marriage, and then the grass would grow back. But you know how they treated it in my time. It was considered a disgrace. That's what I thought out of habit, and then I looked around and everything had changed. What's the point? Now many women give birth to children, but they're in no hurry to get married. What can you do if you're not lucky enough to have a father? We'll raise the kid, work, bring him up. You'll meet a good guy. And this one, what's he worth to you? He's a fool. If only I'd realized who he was before. Sadly, smiled Clara. And now I feel like I have to go all the way. And I keep thinking, well, at least he said that there will be no wedding, even if he refused to marry. Why wait for him to say that? My father was surprised. Can you do it yourself or not? But do you want to? I'll tell him, and I'll throw him down the stairs with my great pleasure, eh? The wedding is the day after tomorrow, Dad, reminded my daughter. Everything is ready, money spent, invitations, restaurant. How can I cancel it all? How then to look people in the eyes? Give it up. Christopher laughed. Who cares? Changed her mind and that's it. If you don't like it, the door's over there. No, you can't do that. Can you marry a jerk? I made a mistake. What can I do? So I'll have to go all the way, said the daughter. And the father realized that no matter how much he wanted to, he couldn't change her mind. She feels sorry for her. She doesn't want to marry that Ethan of hers. She's embarrassed in front of others, but in front of herself, in front of her child. Ethan was getting ready for the wedding. He'd been shopping all day, but he hadn't found anything suitable. What kind of discrimination is this? Why aren't there stores for people who like tattered clothes? What do fashion designers care about? Are they creating some kind of fashion collection? One uglier, one uglier. And where, you may ask, are the fashion collections for the homeless, where in the end, you can get at least a homeless man's masquerade costume? Shopping had worn him out. Ethan was about to fall into despair, but then a brilliant idea struck him. Why look for special clothes? You could just make your own. A pity, of course, but what not to sacrifice for a great cause? All it takes is a little dirt. That's it. Ethan flew home on wings. Once home, he got down to business with all the imagination he could muster. First, he wet the soles of his sneakers with water and carefully walked in them over his sweater and jeans, which he spread out on the floor. The prints were quite convincing, but they weren't the only thing he could do. He found some pistachio ice cream in the fridge and smeared it on his jeans and sweater. Then Ethan poured some instant coffee into a jar and poured it on his sweater, His jeans got a few ketchup stains and a couple of greasy butter stains. Only the finishing touches remained. Ethan, armed with a pair of scissors, carefully cut the sweater along the seam and ripped off the sleeve. Then he stretched the sweater in all directions to add bagginess and was satisfied with his creation. The elegant summer sweater was now unrecognizable. The jeans were a different story. Despite the ketchup, ice cream, and butter, the stupid pants still didn't look bad enough. Ethan stomped around in his sneakers just in case, cut off the back pocket, leaving it dangling on a couple of verses, and in addition, poured a glass of water on one pant leg and poured instant coffee right on the wet spot, then began laboriously rubbing the rich coffee powder right into the fabric. It would be more expressive that way. It really did fix things. Now the pants looked just right. They looked like they'd been pulled out of a dumpster. Ethan marveled aloud, taking another critical look at his clothes. His wedding outfit was ready. Clara sat in the kitchen, melancholy, stirring the sugar in her cup. The wedding dress hung in its former place. The girl had glanced at it without interest in the morning and passed it by. "You're not dressed yet," surprised Christopher. He saw that his daughter was sitting in her pajamas, her hair gathered in a shaggy bundle, and did not even try to look at the clock. He himself had already managed to wake up, eat breakfast, and take a shower. Now he only had to get dressed and could go to marry his daughter. But only the daughter was not in a hurry. Soon the groom will come, and you are unwashed, sitting in your pajamas. How can you do that? What's the matter with you, Clara? Don't you feel well? "I don't want to get married, Papa," she said, without any expression. "I don't. To Ethan, no, you shouldn't marry a man like that. I only realized last night you can't. It would be a tragedy. It'd be misery, and I've got a baby to think about. Dad, can we still call it off? Isn't it too late? But you found time to change your mind." The father smiled and patted the girl's hair. "Right on the day of the wedding. Well, better late than never. Your fool is coming, and you'll tell him. Or do you want me to tell him?" "No, Dad, don't. I'll tell him myself. I'll decide. I'll tell him myself." Clara finally looked up at her father with a tired look. "I haven't slept all night." He understood. "Look at the circles under your eyes. Oh, youth, youth? Don't worry, my child," he said quietly. "You've made the right decision." Ethan looked at himself in the mirror again with pleasure. Perfect. He had thought of everything, or almost everything. No, the watch had to come off. He smeared a little olive oil on his hair to make it stick together, then sprinkled it with flour. It was perfectly messy and even somewhat dusty, and the stubble on his face, which he hadn't gotten rid of in 2 days, had grown back sloppily. It remained to pay attention to his nails. The question of manicure was solved very simply. Ethan went outside and sat down on the nearest lawn, digging into the ground for a while. His sneakers, which he had also covered with earth, looked a little more civilized than necessary, and the guy got rid of the laces. Now everything was perfect. It was time to go after the bride. Just before Clara's house, Ethan stopped and took a few deep breaths and exhaled. And so the final act of the play Escape from Family Life began. An important key moment in his plan. Now it is necessary to play. Well, play brightly and even, probably brilliantly. Otherwise tonight he'll find himself a married man. The door was opened for him by Clara herself. "Ethan? What's the matter with you?" "Clara!" He howled and fell to his knees. "Clara, I'm so bad, I'm worse." "Clara, at least beat me. Will it make me feel better?" "Beat me, beat me." Ethan, calm down. "What's this masquerade?" She's pregnant. She can't fight. Do you want me to beat you up?" suggested Christopher, who heard Ethan's cries. "Clara, get away. Let me get that slacker." "But Dad," the girl was angry. "You've got time for jokes. The man is so happy." "Without much sympathy," said Christopher. "Maybe he should call an ambulance?" "Clara," howled Ethan. "Clara, my darling girl, my favorite, how are we going to live with you now?" "Daddy's broke. They took everything from us for debts, every last cent. There's no money, no real estate. They took away all the shares. We have nothing left. How are we going to live now? How can I marry you now? My beauty, my Clara, my darling, my darling, my darling. Don't be silent. Tell me something, please." "Oh," the girl sighed. "Thank God, honestly." "What?" Ethan stopped howling in surprise and raised his head. "Clara, we can't get married now, can we?" "That's a good thing," she said sincerely. "I'm sorry, Ethan. It's probably my own fault for not saying it sooner. But you realize that. What kind of family are you? You don't want it. Neither do I. What about your dad going broke? Of course he is, but maybe it's not that bad. I'm sure he's not that broke or anything. Don't you want to marry me?" Ethan interrupted her. Well, yes, I don't. And it's a good thing we realized it before we got married." "You don't want to marry me?" he repeated, shocked. Clara sighed. "I don't. I'm sorry." Ethan rose to his feet and looked at the girl resentfully. "So I've been freaking out that now we can't get married. And you? Fuck you. Have a nice stay." Ethan rushed down the stairs and thought that this was it. He was running towards his long-awaited freedom, but for some reason he wasn't happy about it. "Good girl," said Christopher. "Well done, but don't take offense at him. It's just a slip of the tongue. Don't feel bad, baby. You did the right thing." And Ethan jumped out into the street, without slowing down, ran away from this house, away from Clara, away from her father, away from her child. From this whole nightmare story, for which he was ashamed and for some reason also very offended. As if he had just been betrayed by his most trusted friend. Only now, when everything was behind him, he wanted to ask himself, what was so bad about marrying this sweet, loving girl? And would it have been so terrible to become a father? But it was both painful and pointless to think about it now. He had thought for too long that he was being trapped, lured like an animal into a trap, and he had been ready to do anything to break free. And now he wasn't needed, and it turned out that no one was trying to catch him. And the trap was not a trap. It's he himself made up a hell of a lot of things. But what about it now? What's the point? He ran along the asphalt path, and it seemed that this run could go on, if not forever, then for many, many millennia. Ethan never tired and never wanted to stop, ever. Maybe one day he would collapse from fatigue somewhere in Cambodia, but that would be later, when he was exhausted. Only then, and not before. But this time life decided everything for him. A persistent phone call made him stop. "What?" Ethan bellowed into the receiver. It was Nancy. Her sister, which was absolutely unbelievable, was sobbing at the top of her voice. "What are you crying about? I can't understand a word you're saying. Ethan, come at once. Dad was in an accident. He wasn't saved. Can you hear me? Where is he now? Is he in the hospital? Is he in surgery right now? Do you need anything? How about blood? We're the same type. Ethan," Nancy screamed. "Dad's dead. He's dead, you know." "You're lying," whispered Ethan. "You're lying. Aren't you, Nancy?" "I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I don't believe you." He shouted so loudly that an elderly woman with a dog on a leash, passing by, flinched and stepped away. "I don't believe you." Ethan shouted, "I don't believe it. You're lying." "Nancy, I don't believe you." But he did. Nancy wouldn't joke like that. He knew it. "I'm on my way to the lineup," said the sister through her tears. "You come too." "I can't on my own." "Come, I'm waiting for you, Ethan." "Will you come?" "I'll come," he whispered. I'll come right now. The rest of it went on like an endlessly sad movie, and everything Ethan remembered was somehow very vague. No matter how hard Ethan tried, he couldn't remember how he'd gotten a cab and gotten to Nancy. He only remembered calling his sister from the car and trying to find out where he was going and where she was waiting for him. And Nancy was sobbing, mixing up addresses, couldn't remember anything. Then she handed the phone to someone and the address was found. Ethan found her almost unconscious, sedated. He had to identify his father's body. Ethan had heard that morgues could be cold, but for some reason he felt neither cold nor warm or anything. His father lay covered with a sheet, and when Ethan looked at his face, he saw almost no damage. That pleased him for some reason. Why? He couldn't remember that either. Maybe he just didn't want his father's face to be disfigured. The funeral, another moment of reverence, lingered in his memory. Ethan only remembered that his sister, despite her grief, had been able to pull herself together fairly quickly and had looked solemnly calm at the funeral, standing at his father's coffin. Ethan was not calm, and he was not calm either. He couldn't make himself feel anything, nothing at all, as if all his emotions had been numbed or taken away at once. He kept watching his father's coffin being lowered into the ground, and only one question kept him in suspense. Why? Why did his father need money? Why had he worked so hard to earn it? Why? Why did he hardly ever leave work? Why did he work like a slave in the galleys? What was it all for if it was all over in an instant? Only now Ethan realized that he had always thought that money could protect him from something. I guess it could, but all the money in the world couldn't stop a truck from going into the oncoming lane. Well, that's just how it is. Ethan couldn't get that thought out of his head. And then, sitting next to his sister at the reading of the will, it all became so unimportant. The money, the share in the business, the stock. What did it matter now? He thought about whether his father had time to look up at the sky. How often did he go out with friends? How many times had he sat on the ocean and watched the fiery, tropical sun sink in? Had he ever even seen the ocean? Or had he never had time to go on vacation? Somehow, that was all that began to matter. Nothing else. Hey, he looked up. "Nancy, did you say something?" "I couldn't hear." "You know, it doesn't matter, though." "Nancy." Ethan put his hand on his sister's shoulder. "I want to give up my share of the inheritance in your favor." "What?" She was confused. "What are you saying?" "Dad made a will for both of us, and you're saying you want to give up everything." "Why? Of the two of us." He smiled. "You're the one who's always smarter, more responsible. You're determined, strong. You won't let the cause to which our father devoted his whole life go to the wind. And that's why I want you to have it all. It's only fair and just. You should give it to someone who can hold it together and grow it. Not a schmuck like me. I'd really spend it all in a year and end up with nothing. That'd be okay, but I feel sorry for my dad. He put his whole life into this. There's just one thing I'd like to ask you. It's about Clara. I'm not going to say anything in front of strangers right now. I'll text you, okay?" Nancy covered her eyes for a second, then wiped away a tear with her handkerchief. "What about you? She asked quietly. "What are you going to do?" "Ethan?" He shrugged. "Me, I'll watch the sky, the sunsets. I'm leaving, sis. There's nothing more for me to do in this town." He squeezed the girl's shoulder lightly and walked out into the street. The whole world was waiting for him now. For a brief moment, Ethan wanted to go over to Clara's house to say goodbye to her, but he shouldn't have. He managed to realize something about himself. His father lived for work, and he, Ethan, could stay here and live for the child, but he shouldn't do that. There was nothing he could do. Everything in their family, the truest of naturals, fans. Dad and Nancy are work fans, and Ethan, he's a fan of freedom. And that's probably better than being a fan of parenting. It's bound to break the kid. No, better to watch the sunset. He went to the ticket counter and asked for a one-way ticket. "Where to?" they asked him. "Anywhere." "Wait for me, though. Anywhere to the ocean, and preferably south." Ethan stepped off the airplane straight into paradise. At least this place looked a lot like it. Tall palm trees waved in the wind, their huge leaves wreathed in opahalas. A wonderful fragrance of flowers wafted in the air. In the distance, but still close, the ocean offered its waters to the sun. The speech of the passers-by was more like the chirping of birds in the morning spring. "No luggage, sir?" Someone addressed him in passable English. "I don't need it." Ethan smiled. The joy, the fullness of life, made him want to sing. Never before in his life had he felt so free. He had a little money. Enough to eat twice at any of the local cafes. And beyond that, he was too lazy to think about it. Tomorrow seemed so far away. There would be a day, there would be food. He went forward, not choosing the road. All paths here would sooner or later lead to the ocean. Nancy had no difficulty in finding Clara's address. She had arrived there in the morning to be sure to find her brother's ex-fiancé at home. She looked at her guest with a noticeably rounded belly, a little plump and surprised. "So it is you, Ethan's sister?" she asked at last. "How odd that you don't look like him at all." "Unfortunately, you're right, Clara." Nancy smiled. "Not in appearance, not in character, not in content. But that's not why I came here. I know my brother well, Clara, and I know that Ethan is, well, to put it mildly, not the most responsible person in the world. That's just the way he is, despite his many virtues. But I'm not a stranger to his child, and I'm his own aunt. And if you don't mind—" "Oh, so you want to see the baby?" She was delighted. "Well, of course, whenever you want. What are we talking about?" "I would like not only to see, but also to take care of my nephew." Nancy corrected the girl. "To take over, so to speak, fatherly duties." "Oh, come on, really. No, please, listen to me, because it concerns the baby and his future. First of all, you, Clara, will receive a certain amount of money every month for the baby. Don't argue. Ethan, and you may not know this, has renounced his part of the inheritance in my favor. So I've decided that I'm going to dispose of it this way, with part of the money going to child support and the rest for your baby to inherit afterward. Well, in short, when his time comes to receive the inheritance, and until then I will try to see to it that the share of my nephew did not depreciate, but on the contrary, became more. I hope you won't object and argue with me. No. It is obvious to me, for example, that this is the right and just decision. You won't challenge it, will you?" "No, I know you wouldn't." "Nancy, I just wasn't ready. I understand everything you could tell me, that you're not in need, that your father will help you. But I still think it's justice. Don't deny me the chance to right my brother's wrong. I beg you very much. 8 months in the tropics will get to anyone. Ethan knew that now. Personal experience is nothing to be trifled with. Don't confuse tourism with emigration. Tourists fly in for a week's vacation, decide they're in paradise. Here, the sun is always shining and the ocean breaks its waves on the shore, and over the shore carried snow-white seagulls. For some reason, he realized now that it was time to go home. He had a sudden urge to see his sister, to see how she was doing, and to visit Clara. The baby must have been born by now, though Ethan had stopped counting the months long ago. He just lived, not caring about the numbers on the calendar or the days of the week. Sometimes hired for a paltry wage to load bananas for export. Sometimes for a bowl of food, he agreed to wash dishes in local eateries. Sometimes begging. Once even had an affair with a pretty mulatto. But alas, the passion quickly faded because they could not explain themselves to each other. Miracle Girl chattered in some unknown language and did not understand a word of English. But still their love passion allowed Ethan to live without hunger for several weeks. His beauty was a great cook, and there was always food in the house. That marvelous little girl worked in a cafe as a cook. There was a brief period in this strange life of his, full of coincidence, when Ethan got involved with a local gang, and for a while he robbed them and ran away from the police. Though, to be honest, he hadn't had to run away very often. The police here had an easy time turning a blind eye to a lot of things. If, of course, to offer the officers of the law a small cash reward, in general, it was very understandable. There were far more petty thugs than policemen in this banana paradise, and everyone wanted to live in peace. Strangely enough, Ethan liked it. At first, it even seemed that he would not part with his new friends and would eventually become the new Pablo Escobar. He was prophesied to have a great future. At first, it rounded his head and encouraged him. But then Ethan somehow got bored of it all at once. Who does not know, he may think that the life of any romantic from the big road can be anything dangerous, luxurious, frightening, saturated. But Ethan has personally experienced that even in such a profession, there is enough of its routine. One day he just left, quietly, without saying goodbye or throwing a party. His associates probably thought he'd been hit by a bullet in one of the endless street shootouts. It was a common occurrence. No one was looking for Ethan. And now he was standing on the shore, thinking that spring was probably in full swing back home, and for the first time in a long, endless time, he wanted to walk the familiar streets and hear his native speech. Yes, it was time to go back. He said to himself, "It's definitely time now." If he got a job loading bananas again, he could save up for a ticket in a month. Clara was cradling her tiny son and softly singing a lullaby to him. Christopher looked into his daughter's room and looked at two of the dearest and most beloved people in the world, Clara and baby No. Nothing is more precious than this. He thought, for the umpteenth time there isn't, and there won't be. Life, ongoing, endless from father to daughter, from daughter to grandchild. Clara caught her father's gaze and smiled. He had already fallen asleep. She said in a whisper. Christopher gently took the child in his arms and moved him to the crib. "Do not regret it?" he asked. "For what?" The daughter did not understand. He did not know what to answer. Probably about everything at once. About having a baby. About Ethan not working out. "Nonsense, Dad. Why should I regret it? I had such a wonderful son. And Ethan, what the hell with him? Besides, Father has noticed that you seem to have a new boyfriend." Well, you think I didn't notice the way that Doctor looked at you? I even came to see you off in person when you were discharged. You can't be fooled." Clara laughed. He's kind of looking after me, and I like him a lot too. Although, of course, it's too early to talk about something serious. What's the hurry? There's no hurry. Christopher agreed. Noah rumbled softly in the crib. Clara came over, but her father gestured for her to stop. It's all right, I'll do it. He rocked the crib quietly and sang a lullaby to his grandson. Clara looked at her father and her heart warmed. The eternal circle of life from parents to children, from children to grandchildren. And nothing is more important than that nothing. Ethan. Nancy shouted when she saw her brother on the doorstep. He was terribly overgrown, dirty, and dressed in some strange rags, a veritable shambles. But it was her brother. She couldn't help but recognize him. How I've missed you, little sister, how you've become. Nancy had clearly crossed the threshold between angular girl and young beautiful woman in a matter of months. She had put on a little weight, but it suited her remarkably well. Her cheeks, shoulders, and breasts had plumped up. Her movements had become fluid, and she had dyed her hair a couple of shades darker, just enough to accentuate her fair skin and emphasize her eyes. How beautiful you've become. Ethan said sincerely, and you? I've been going places no decent person should go. I'll tell you about it someday, or even write a book. Later, his sister interrupted him. Tell me the most important thing. Did you come back for good? I mean back to a normal human life. You see, I need someone I can trust. No, Nancy, I'm sorry. He even put his hands out in front of him, like he wanted to protect himself from his sister's words. I can't. I wanted to see you. Just to be home. It's been a while, but you can't ask for more than that. I wish I could help you, but it's not my thing. Constancy, business, home, I'll only make things worse. I'll run away at the worst possible moment. Then what? But maybe you could at least think about it. Nancy suggested it. It's not like I'm suggesting you chain yourself to the office. We could find you something remotely, even something as simple as that, for starters. And then before you know it, you'll be up to your neck in business. He stopped his sister gently. It's not for everyone. Sis, people like you like it, but it doesn't suit me at all. No offense to me, but suit yourself. Nancy lowered her head with a sigh. I'm sorry, of course, but I suppose it's true. Everyone should do his own thing, what his soul is drawn to. You've grown up, sister. Ethan grinned. So have you. She answered him in the same tone. You haven't changed either. Have you been to see Clara? She's married, but I'm still doing what you asked me to do. She gets good alimony, and when your son gets older. Thank you, Nancy. Ethan meant what he said. He didn't come in. You don't need to bring anything up. She's doing well, and I'm glad of it. She's a wonderful person, very kind and sincere. Everyone would be happy to have such a wife. But not you. My sister smiled sadly. I am not suitable for Constancy. When it catches up with me, I get mad and start doing such a wild thing that I am ashamed of myself. Why should I ruin a good woman's life? Let alone my own child. Does she have a good husband? Yes, a very good husband. He's so protective of her and the baby. They're very happy, both Clara and Noah. I think in a couple of years they'll give Noah a brother or sister. Well, that's good. Ethan smiled. And now I'm going to go. It was good to see you by. Will you at least spend the night? My brother smiled nonchalantly. I'm not used to sleeping indoors unless the weather's really bad, and then I get nervous. But today it's warm. It felt good to be out on the city streets at night. Not that Ethan was looking for trouble, but somehow he was lucky. Or maybe it was just that it was peaceful at home compared to the tropical paradise. He'd never once run into a mugger, never had to deal with hooligans looking for someone to beat up. You could say the city at night was favorable to him. The streets were bright with streetlights, storefronts, and car headlights. He liked to sit on a bench and look at the road, cars passing by, everything like in life. Everyone goes his own way, and someone will get to the goal safely, and someone because of daredevillery will get into an accident, but will get off only a fright. And some, I didn't want to think about them. Ethan had become a surprisingly friendly man. I guess his life as a homeless man, his new life, had something to do with it. While he was rich, few people treated him kindly, only his colleagues in the racket, and those were gone as soon as he was a pauper. But now he was helped not to die by strangers, whom he knew had only enough, but kind grandmothers' traders sometimes treated him with apples from their stalls. The cook at the street kiosk once took a long look at Ethan squatting on the curb with his alms bowl, then beckoned him over and gave him a huge, freshly cooked shawarma. And that man in the entryway, who wouldn't let the scandalized neighbors kick out in the rain, a vagrant. These are such rays of kindness in a cruel world. You look at it, and you become kinder yourself. And even his seemingly bitchy sister. How happy she was to see his brother. How she persuaded him to stay and return to civilized life, to settle down. But she didn't succeed. Ethan had become too attached to freedom. And freedom he now understood as the complete absence of attachments to addresses, cities, people. Ethan would be howling with longing in a week if he were to go back to his old self. And no money was worth it, no money ever. Today he found a good spot right across the street from the restaurant. People come out of there nice because they're full, and if they're drunk, the catch could be great. True, they were often chased away from fish places, but if you don't worry and try to be inconspicuous, you might get lucky. Without any nostalgia, he looked at the huge, brightly lighted windows and polished steps at the entrance. Was it really only a year ago that he himself had been in places like this every day? Waiters in uniform with polite smiles now seemed to him creatures from another world, and not so long ago he considered them idlers, unworthy of any attention, servants. How are things changing? A few more coins fell into his coin bowl. Ethan raised his head. "Thank you, Ethan." The young woman who had just dropped the change into his piggy bank squatted down and looked straight into the tramp's face. Ethan instinctively pulled back, hiding deeper into his hood. His hair had grown long enough to cover his face, along with his beard. He wouldn't recognize him. He wouldn't even recognize himself now. He couldn't see his old self, no matter how hard he tried. But she did, didn't she? "Ethan? Is that you, Ethan?" Clara kept repeating his name, but he didn't want to respond to it. He hadn't been Ethan for a long time, at least not the Ethan she knew. "You're wrong, girl," he said hoarsely. "That's not my name." "I'm sorry." Clara straightened up and took out a few bills from her purse. "Here you go, please. And sorry again. I thought you reminded me of someone I know." "I'm sorry." He nodded without raising his head. "Clara," someone called out to her. Ethan squinted his eyes. A young man was standing beside a brand new car, opening the doors for his beloved. "I'm coming," she smiled. Her heels clicked on the pavement. The smell of perfume wafted away. She had gone far away, and there was no need to catch up with her. Ethan took some paper money from his piggy bank and hid it under his sweatshirt. "Thank you, Clara." Tonight he would have food and maybe even a little beer. What more could a free man dream of?